Well, here we go. We are rocking and rolling. We're earlier than we usually are. So, for those that you will be joining retrospectively, we're actually on time. And that's on account of me because I'm normally a bit late. So, this is like actually a really good time slot for me. That extra 15 minutes makes the world of difference. So, let's start cranking up. Well, before we get into the topic, we're going to see who's here with us now. I'll go around the table clockwise. We've got Zerilat Eternal here. Zerilat is he's a druid person from the Norse tradition. I think that's the right description. Druid, wizard, magician.
I prefer to go with with magician, like more like ceremonial magician type situation. The way my research goes, shaman is very, very specific of a thing that very few people are.
Yeah, it's a totally sacrificial path in a sense. You have to sacrifice yourself to the guides and let them handle you like a like a leaf in the wind.
I do my practice, but I am not a other than certain high principles. I'm not in a service to any kind of discipline.
Yeah. So there we go. We've got Zerilot. He's also got a YouTube channel. If you go and check out Zerilot Eternal, you'll find it's got some really cool content on it as well. He's done a lot of research into the Buck, the Buck saga, which is really interesting. Taking a look at the European roots. A lot of our ancient cultural roots can be tracked there.
Oh yeah.
And then we've got Silas Speaks with us. He's also got a YouTube channel. Go and check out Silas Speaks. Both of them with an at in front of them, of course. And Silas has done a lot of work on the Illuminati, the Saturn connections, the Saturn Mars, Saturn Moon. And I think he's been doing a show lately on the tarot as well. But he's got a lot of content out there. Go and check out Silas Speaks. He's got a lot of really interesting topics, also along the lines of Gnosticism and other sort of mystery traditions. And so, yeah, and I'm the Bush Whisperer. And how would you identify yourself, Silas?
Oh, I'm just a guy. I don't know.
Guy.
I don't know. I let other people.
Are you one of the builders?
I'm one of the Well, I am actually a builder by trade, so I guess I would be.
I'm just teasing, brother. Yeah, no, he's a builder, but he's not necessarily a builder, if you know what I mean. He's just building with his hands.
Wink, wink, nod, nod.
Well, with your brain, like, developing. Maybe one day you'll become a land developer. Scary thought, huh?
Oh yeah.
Well, everybody will be protesting against your developments on the sidewalk with placards. People like me will be out there again, like, stop building this building. We don't need it. So yeah, we've got a lovely crew here to get us kicked off, and we're gonna be talking about the spirit of living and dying, with a sort of focus on the afterlife, reincarnation, soul traps. I'm sure Silas is going to have a lot to say about soul traps, which is a Babylonian thing. There was a big thing in Babylon. Also comes from older. I think it comes from Akkadian traditions. And the obviously the Chemians, the ancient Egyptians, had a lot of knowledge of this. And so this has been sort of I think also along these lines, living and dying, we'll also be speaking about entities, beings that are not physical on the other side, other types of undead creatures, if we can call them that, which, opens the doors to all sorts of like goblins, as well as, creatures that have been created magically. Interesting concept. Golems, for example, as they're well known, which is actually a Paleo-Hebrew word borrowed by the Hebrews. Regardless, let's get cranking, let's get rolling, let's get moving, and I'm going to leave the table open. Like, who wants to start? Who wants to get the ball rolling? Anybody got any ideas to start with?
Well, something that's recent to my memory, because I just read it last night doing things on my show, is I came to a chapter in Flavius Josephus's The Jewish War. And in that, he's gotten to a point where he has to explain the difference between the Essenes versus the Pharisees and the Sadducees, as well as the fact that there are two different versions of the Essenes. And he has to do this for the context of why they aren't involved in the affairs that are being triggered. And he goes and explains their commune. And they have what seems like one of the Essenes believes in reincarnation, the way that the way that it was phrased by Josephus, or by the and the translator. Depends on what's lost in translation, of course, because he uses in his translation various parlances of the 1920s in a couple of places, which must be replacing parlances or expressions that Josephus may have used in Latin at the time, or Hebrew, whichever way he wrote whichever language he wrote the book in. And so the other Essenes may seem to have more of a they have more of a radical, like, do not make children kind of policy, and there had to be an explanation as to why their sect was kind of like, bring people in. Do you want, like, that's what they were a sect of initiates versus an Essenes that was a sect of families, and they actually believed in having children because there was something important about carrying the soul forward, right? Carrying the people forward. And because because you want to make an heir who's a suitable inhabitant for a soul. Like, that's the way it seemed like it was conveyed. And I said, like, so hold on, were these Jews that are affirming reincarnation? Is that what Josephus is claiming, that these Jews believe in reincarnation, as opposed to all the others who have more of a different ways you sit in Sheol kind of situation? It is kind of what I think it is. It's been a while since I've paid close attention to how the Hebrew stuff works, because it's such a different attitude than the Christian and the Catholic that I know.
Yeah. The Essenes really were the sort of proto-Gnostic sect. I'm pretty sure as well, if I do recall,
Yes.
they also had a type of master, which the way that it's described, I believe it's in the Nag Hammadi libraries, if I recall correctly. I'm not sure if Flavius Josephus mentions it, but they had this master, which the description of him was almost uncannily like Christ, in terms of he was a miracle worker and such.
They were hardcore on purity. They were like a purity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the way Josephus was reading it, I was thinking of the modern day, and I'm just sitting there on the live stream being like, well, this reminds me of David Koresh. Oh, this reminds me of literally the communist left right now, except with lots of nudity, as opposed to these guys that are Puritans. So you actually have the Puritans in here mixed with the economic, social ideology of the hardcore woke types, right? There's all these different bad ideas in this one effing group. It blew my mind.
Oh, they also, I believe, if I recall correctly, they had a diet solely of honey and locusts, the ones who were, very extreme and who would go out into the wilderness. But the Sadducees as well, very much similar to, I guess you could say, the Pharisees or Pharisaical tradition that's become now Judaism. I don't believe they actually even had a notion of the afterlife, if I do recall.
The diet of the Essenes, Josephus does get into that. That might be something that they had to do in the tests, perhaps, because they're proving their loyalty because of how hardcore. Like, you're living a religious life. You have rituals that you do all day, and your participation in the entire mental construct of it is a sign of trust, in which you then have full access to the community's resources, right? And so you own nothing accept what you ration for your day, and you can even give out your meal to strangers, but you can't do that within the community. It's very interesting rules, but they didn't get, they got fed a ration though. This is communism. They definitely, but it wasn't just, there's probably locusts there because you live in the fucking desert and you're trying. You see, these guys were anti-Romans. They were hardcore anti-Romans. They were basically isolationists. That's why they got together as their own thing.
Yeah, they were. The Pharisees were certainly more of the sort of Judeo-Hellenic tradition. But of course, yeah, absolutely. The Essenes, I believe the Maccabees it was sort of similar idea. The earlier Maccabees, where they were just purely nationalistic, like hyper nationalistic. They despised the Romans. Absolutely. Of course, that's continued on in Kabbalistic tradition as well. If you look into the Zohar, it mentions Rome constantly and attributes it to Esau and Samael too. And there's a couple of other appellations, the attributes, which of course are all they're derisory, they're insulting. But as well, if I recall correctly, on the communist thing and the sort of communal property and the rations and you will own nothing and be happy, that sort of mantra, I believe that also is found within the New Testament. I'm sure Christ, if I recall correctly, I'll try and find the actual New Testament verse and passages which mention this, but he was all about selling sell all you have, to pool all the money together as a community, to live communally, all of these sorts of ideas as well.
There were several parallels. There were several parallels to how the Essenes were living to how Jesus was living, which would also probably explain why the Pharisees wanted to do the thing. In that same chapter, Pontius Pilate shows up in that chapter. And it's and according to Josephus, just like the trial of Jesus, he fucking caves into the crowd and like hands over I forget what it is. But he made this huge decision to appease the crowd instead of upholding the Roman, what the Romans would normally do, because this is how badly they cared for the political acceptance of this kingdom. The Romans really wanted to freaking like get these guys to cooperate with the empire, but I don't know why. Effing why?
Well, I think like it's very interesting. You mentioned that Josephus guy, and I watched that guy taken to pieces by, I wish I could remember this guy's channel. It's one of the best channels for American history, old history. It'll come to me in the course of the show, I hope. But he literally goes book by book, and he finds different old books because he's a collector of old books. And he reads the book, opens it in front of you, and he reads from the book. And so he doesn't have much to say. He just says, look at this old book from 1502. Read this. Look at this book from 900 and such and such. Look at this scroll from such and such. And he reads. And a lot of the pseudonyms used by Josephus, and apparently Josephus is a pseudonym that was used by a pseudonym. So these guys were using pseudonyms and writing under pseudonyms, and each pseudonym would have a series of pseudonyms, and some of those pseudonyms would have series of pseudonyms. And you can track down a lot of the Roman history to what he reckons is like 7 royals, most of the Roman history we have throughout all of the so-called historians. So I wonder how much of what has been written is also propaganda. Like I question this, because there's always been propaganda, right? Like they didn't just suddenly invent it in the modern times. Like our politicians, like for example, the propaganda of what's just happened in the Oval Office with the South African president and Bush, and that was orchestrated. And these 3-4 richest guys in South Africa rock up there, and these guys own like a big chunk of the economy, and they're all on side trying to sell the idea, stand up for the president, because obviously he's offered them a kickback, trading within the country.
I think that it's a major, like that was one of the most finality blows to an illusion of what a country is that has ever been demonstrated. For the president of the United States to be that, like, I remember seeing those clips years ago. Those have been in circulation and ignored forever. Very real. I had been following a lot of that.
The irony of it is, though, like here where I am in the Western Cape, it's the least racist place I've ever been in the world. Like, I've never been to a country that's as unracist as the Western Cape where I live. And it's not just that there's a multicultural races living together, but it's literally that we live together. It's not like you've got the black area, the Muslim area, the Indian area. We literally live mixed up, and we literally have like neighbors all around us that are multi races. The race next door to me is Indian, race on the other side is this. There's like loads of different multiracial people, and we all sort of just get on. But it's interesting, like what's been presented. I think there are locations within South Africa where this is being pushed, and those are the farming locations. So it's not a really true, and within certain of the townships, Johannesburg is probably one of the most violent places, second to New York, I think, and maybe another few cities in the world for violent crime, and a lot of massacres happen in Joburg within the townships,
which is fair and all that, right? But like, here you are. Why weren't you in the Oval Office defending South Africa? Like, you're defending it right now way better than the fucking president did. His answer was just like, well, you listen, he's got his right under our constitution to express himself this way.
Basically what it is there's a corrupt government.
I know there's a corrupt government, obviously, but a corrupt government that's willing to look at like I said, like, why do the Romans want Palestine so effing bad during the Jewish war, right? So what does South Africa want from the American Empire so bad? They want something from us, especially because now we have their effing, agricultural makers. They're going to need agriculture. We're one of the biggest agricultural exporters out there. We have certain contracts. We can make all sorts of kinds of treaties and secure trade routes because of our navies, yada, yada, yada. All that stuff is back in play for the first time in probably in probably 25 years. It's been 25 years since America has had this posture.
So they need good farmers. I see where they're coming from. And we were promoting Monsanto's in a big way for the last 15 years. And I think that's slowed down over the last 5 years. We've stopped giving Monsanto so much movement in South Africa. But getting back into the and I bet they want that market back, and they want to actually take over our farming industry. It's probably what it is. But so it's sort of like a hostile takeover of a farming, of our agriculture, which we've got a lot of agriculture. But looking at like going back in Rome, like you say, I'm pretty sure the same thing was happening, and Rome was being spread really thin, right? Like taking over the world. It's a big empire. It's a big deal, and they were fighting wars, political propaganda wars in just about every part of every backyard that they owned, so to speak. So I think when we talk about like Judaism and afterlife, I think there's a big part of it that hasn't really been fully accepted. Like, for example, the Torah as we know it was first compiled not 2,000 years ago, not 3,000 years ago, not 4,000 years ago. It was verbally transmitted stories. And bit by bit, they started compiling it 2,000 years ago. And the Torah as we know it, I think, goes back about less than 1,200 years.
Mhm.
So that's how old the Torah is. It's not even 1200. I think it's about 1100 years old. Like as it is condensed. So there were other parts that were not included in that book. The same as with the Bible, right?
Right.
The so-called Bible, right? There were like 97 books that were excluded.
Yeah.
I think that when the compilation of what we know as the Torah came to be what it is,
Yeah.
there are lots. Like, for example, if you look at the fact that they were waiting for the Messiah, okay? Who was the Messiah? The Messiah was supposed to be the reincarnation of who we call Isaiah. That's why the name given to Emmanuel in many parts of the world is Isha, right? And Isha is how Isaiah would be Isha would have been said. And so everybody said, are you he that came before? Right? So it was accepted that reincarnation was a thing that could or would or is possible. And it was part of a prophecy that just about was on the lips of every Jew. They were expecting the reincarnation of a great prophet.
Yeah.
So if prophets could reincarnate, then who else could?
Right. But they shifted that to a resurrection, and they made as such that the resurrection is really well, I guess you could be a saint. Like if you can perform a resurrection, the Catholic Church would acknowledge that you've got God's touch, so on and so forth. Right. So everything is much more on the resurrection thing, right? It's just like that's what we did. We replaced the concept of reincarnation with resurrection because they wanted to get us terrified of death, which was their plan for shaping the psyche for the age of Pisces.
Mhm.
Right? Because you're going to be in this constant back and forth at odds with your own character, going between certainty and despair, right? And this is the two fish of Pisces circling each other and them hijacking the meaning of those two fish to keep you in the infinite feedback loop in the Ouroboros.
Yes, absolutely. And the Piscean age as well was an age of blind faith, arguably, too. And it's interesting as well. A lot of it's very ritualistic, especially with the rise of Christianity. And yet, you're totally correct, Bush Whisperer. The Torah probably was an oral tradition. It stretched further back, but
But it's not just the books are missing from the Torah; it's the language is missing from the nation, right?
Yeah.
Everybody. Like I brought this up in my stream too because of points that I went on tangents from reading that chapter. Was that if you didn't realize it before Dr. Hillman started repeating it every freaking episode on his channel about the Greek language versus the Hebrew language and the reconstructionism that made up what the original draft of the Bible actually was, you realize that they're trying to hold the integrity together of the whole body of a nation, and they only got like an arm of the whole body, right? If the language is the whole body of the nation, they got like an arm. They're missing the rest, and they're trying to build an entire god and culture off of one arm
or a finger,
or a finger.
Even the term Mashiach as well. I mean, that idea of the anointed one. I think that's the literal translation from the Hebrew. That itself is an ancient Egyptian word. I think there's about 300 supposedly Hebrew words within the Old Testament that are directly attributable, or they're just simply loan words from the ancient Egyptian language. Mashiach or Messiah is one of them. The Mish was the crocodile. The crocodile oil was utilized to anoint the Pharaoh. So you even have that, I guess you could call it theological plagiarism in a sense. And Judaism has quite a lot of that. Of course, as well, even prior to, I guess you could say, the prophet Elijah's time, which is what, perhaps the 800 BC or so. Prior to that, even the Old Testament seems to indicate that that Judaism was not monotheistic. It was, at the very least, henotheistic. And then, of course, potentially even polytheistic. So Yahweh himself was probably an amalgamation, just like the theological tradition of Abrahamism in general, was an amalgamation of multiple philosophies, theologies, and liturgical disciplines and what have you.
Yeah, you know, I mean, this is an interesting point of perspective. So when we track the language back, and I'm trying to find, I had a wonderful image of the Phoenician and the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet side by side. Phoenician and basically it's the same alphabet. It's so similar that the differences, the nuances between Paleo-Hebrew and Phoenician, it's basically the same alphabet. Okay, they take the character and they move it over to the right, 30, 40 degrees, but it's the same character. Or they extend that line slightly more that way. Or change the cross to be like with a circle instead of just a cross. But otherwise, it's blatant. I mean, you just look at those two alphabets side by side, and it's very clear, especially the older versions of both. So there's no doubt that the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet is the Phoenician alphabet. Mm-hmm. And from the Paleo-Hebrew split off became the Arabic and the Aramic, and from the Aramic developed the Hebrew, and many of the Shemite languages developed from the Paleo-Hebrew or directly from the Phoenician. Not that there is even a difference between the Paleo-Hebrew and the Phoenician alphabet. They could have just been two different versions of the same written in different areas, possibly slightly different times. But regardlessly, when you look at the Phoenician, now what the Phoenician is they were originally writing using not Akkadian script, but cuneiform from Sumeria. So just before that alphabet came to be, the same words, the same language was being written with Sumerian cuneiform. Then there was some kind of a breakaway, political, probably changes, religious, where these people that were speaking that same Phoenician language, which is effectively Sumerian, right? Because they were writing with Sumerian, and probably as an offshoot of Sumerian, hence they were using the Sumerian characters, decided no, they were going to develop their own characters. And their own characters were developed from, guess where? None other than the land of Chem. So the hieroglyphics from ancient Egypt, or pre-ancient Egypt, from what we consider it, the land of Chem, became the 22 base alphabetical, the first phonetic letters that were extracted from the metaphors of these symbolisms, which are actually quite well documented in the Tarot and the major arcana. This is why there's such a powerful connection between the Hebrew language and the major arcana. And you can see the same connection if you look at the Old Greek, if you know how to adjust the Old Greek, because they changed it a bit, or the Arabic.
Do you want me to?
You can see the same connection. But the point I'm getting at is that all of the words came from ancient Egypt, because they were using ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. So these are the same people. So a lot of the language of Greek came from ancient Egypt. Hebrew came from ancient Hebrew. Arabic came from ancient Egypt. The more you look around, a lot of the Shemite languages came from ancient Egypt, from that pre-ancient land of Chem, I would call it, land of very ancient Egypt, which is where the Phoenician language developed and where it was found, where it was carved from the images. And that has then become the proto-language building block, which is now fundamentally responsible for Arabic, Hebrew. Even the Greeks drew their language directly from ancient Egypt. So I think everything, I would say that most of the languages come from ancient Egypt. And if you look older, if you look into the angelic names, it goes back to Persia, and that very, very ancient language from Persia, which is arguably as old as Sanskrit, the Farsi, some of the very old Farsi, which they find the same strip of language up in the higher steps, as far east as the Anapan regions up in the Indus Valley, which is the oldest settlements that they had found up until they uncovered Turkey. But Turkey is its own story. So, my point is that all of these languages come from the same source.
Yeah, I do believe they come from the same source too. The way my findings work it with the Box saga is that that area would have been after connection was lost. All the languages were coming together there because they needed to find a new center, right? Because they couldn't go back to hell. They couldn't go back to Udenma. They're cut off from the ice, and they're living closer to the equator where the sun is doing most of its activity. So they're coming all into that region and handling different aspects and really putting a complete writing system into play. Where I think beforehand we had a much stronger memory, and oral tradition was so good that people didn't conceive very much of needing to write any of these things down, right? And so I think that then writing had to be instituted to keep thoughts alive, because I think our memories were getting worse, and we said we have to give writing to everybody because nobody deserves to lose their memories like this. We're not used to our minds working this way since the world changed.
Could it have been part of a propaganda? Part of an old propaganda system, which was basically rewriting history and telling you, forget those silly stories, you talk folklore nonsense. Here's the written history.
The events represented by the incursion of Thoth the Atlantean into the office of Tahuti is where all of that in Egypt spawns from. That's where a great deal of the corruption of the mind comes from the embodiment of Tahuti into a worshipped entity akin to a god, when it was actually an office of an earthly position for a high priest that was involved in the mythos.
I think as well,
I would say. Sorry, you were saying, dear brother.
Oh no, sorry. I was just going to say really quickly. If you look at most of the quote quote technological advancements, for example, AI, they tend to be directed in a way that, well, essentially furnishes the tools that power requires. So ultimately, that is to debilitate humanity. And like what you were mentioning, both of you, it was to debilitate humanity's memory. So if you debilitate their memory, then it opens up the possibility to rewrite history, to rewrite and to refashion, re-envision the reality itself by control of the mind, because all power ultimately stems from control of the mind. And it's similar in a sense to AI. AI is working in a similar manner, where it's seemingly disabusing or disarming people of that intuition, and also arguably even knowledge, even thinking, the originality of thought and things such as that.
Yes, because we're talking about the life and death thing within this context. Another thing about Thoth is the House of the Net. The House of the Net is basically how Thoth captures souls to put them into the well of souls, right? So that's a system in which the current way that we go through reincarnation is a part of. That was added in by the Dark Priestcraft classes that came in with those incursions that I spoke of before, right? So the House of the Net, that's a big tell on things. I talk about that in my Holy Mountain breakdown with Slick Dissident. because of how the architecture looked like that of a net, of a grid matrix, and what was involved with the agony of souls inside that building. I said, like, my God, this is the house of the net. This is the horror show, right? So beautiful stuff, terrifying stuff, and part of my purpose here is to break that system and bring us back to wholeness.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, we speak about the proverbial death of memory, of super consciousness that we had, because we obviously never needed to write things down. And I get the strong sense that we're going through the same process now with AI and technology. And I'm guessing that at that time, we look at the pyramids, we look at a lot of the ancient technology evidence that we see on the planet. There must have been some supreme ancient technology that was flying. Namaste, Culty Talk. I hope you're good. How are you doing? And so we seem to be going in cycles. It's almost like a reincarnation of culture. The culture is once again going into not being alive, losing our intelligence, being dumbed down. And then from these ashes, we grow up again and become highly sophisticated intellectually. As we see these cycles in the past, like we look at the Dark Ages and we think we must have been like, what was wrong with us? But perhaps we were suffering the effects of these kind of governance protocols that we see happening now, that was using possibly AI in the past. I mean, we look at the Hebrew tradition and the language, there seems to be a lot of this. So I think, like, is the AI the death of our soul? And when I say that metaphorically, I mean effectively, Josh, my boy's got such an active imagination. I hope he's not up to nonsense. He's supposed to be in bed. I'm gonna go and put him in bed for once, for the fourth time, and maybe delete his Minecraft. I'll be back now. Give me a minute, guys.
I was going to make a quick comment on that. That even surrounds this notion of the internet. So they do this quite a lot with the play of language. And of course, English, we could speculate is actually an engineered language itself, at least the modern version. But so you have the internet, the net that enters one to it. So it's almost the perfection of a soul trap through I guess the creation of a digital matrix. We're in the sort of nascent stages of that currently, and
the internet, the internet offers many opportunities to have many different kinds of relationships with it, right? I would say that the kind of relationship that men like you and me have with the internet is perfectly acceptable, right? In what we're doing, because why? We know ourselves. We can trust ourselves. We already have natural intelligence. People that don't know that they don't have natural intelligence, that's the spider's web that they're going to be enticed by the pretty luminescence of the web and fly right into it, and then be opiated by the very chemicals it's made out of, if you will, and that will keep you lulled to sleep while the mother feeds you to her babies. Right? This is the wonderful horror show that's going on with people that are going to just not understand that this is not AI, and that it's merely all it's doing is using a large language model, which is why Hebrew is a problem, because it's not a very large language model, right? So it's an insufficient construct for reality, right? So people feel like they're in this matrix, because you don't know any fucking words. Your vocabulary is your fucking mental freedom. God gave Adam and Eve, this, which is allegedly Oranos and Gaia, that they have the ability to name everything. That is giving your mind ultimate freedom, right? Your ability to name a thing. that means you're giving it its true name. That gives you authority over it. Right? This is why people are enticed to know the true name of angels and demons, so they can have authority over them as God created us able to be.
Also, within the name, there. Oh, jump in, Bush Whisperer.
No, please continue. I'll jump in after you.
On the idea of the name, that's another sort of a linguistic trapping that I was mentioning regarding the sort of engineered nature of English. So, of course, we have live and evil. Of course, there's a lot of these reversals throughout English. But moreover as well, with the word name, obviously within the Splendor Solace, as we were mentioning with the 22 plates, within the entire middle section of those plates, you have, of course, the alembics, the cucurbit, the sealed alchemical vessel where the reactions of the soul. Of course, there's another play on words as well, right? The sun. The sun is associated with the zodiac. It's the celestial clock. In Latin, it's called the soul. What do we call well, our spirit? Another name for it, or another name for the spirit is the soul. So it's this idea that we are being tethered around this thing. The name. So
Psyche, also psyche is the soul.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a very mind-based word. It contains mental conceptualization and is used as such in Greek mythos.
Yeah, it's very interesting when we look at. Sorry, were you not finished, Silas?
Oh no, jump in.
What I was getting at, like, something that you said just a few minutes ago, just to backtrack a moment, about AI and its capacity and its potential. I was very fascinated. I actually went to the British Museum about 15 years ago. Was it 12 years, 13, however many years ago it was? No, about 10, 12 years ago. To go and see the exhibition which had come from Babylon. And because I was very interested to see those little carvings. These men are carving a ceremonial box that's being carried. And they have depictions of people being prostrated in front of this box.
Yeah.
And it seems like, according to these hieroglyphic images, that these people are being fed. And then there were stories of how these things would die, and there were names that related something to like eating of the soul. And it makes me think of the Ark of the Covenant and how this was a communication device between the angels and man, and how it had to be boxed in cedar wood, in a very particular cypress cedar wood configuration, very specific. And the high priest had to wear particular oils of anointment so that he wouldn't be struck dead by this box. And my impression, and this is not a new idea, I was thinking about this like 12 years ago. I was thinking to myself, the AI is the next thing that they're developing, because they were talking about it then. It wasn't what it is today, but it was the next frontier where they were moving towards. And I had been watching the 2045.com. For those of you that don't know it, check it out. It's mind-blowing. The mission, I'll summarize it for you, is that they want to develop new bodies and develop the technology to be able to download human consciousness into a chip and upload that into a different body, be it
this is
cyborg, and then new developed biological entities that are superior. This is their mission. But I followed the money. Like 15 years ago, I followed the money. Back in the days before there was AI controlling the internet, and you could still follow the money. You could still Google things, and you could still get information, not like today. And I had found billions and billions of dollars of investment in the beginning of this program. And the investment had just kept rolling on. And, the Dalai Lama was the face of this, for example. They had religious figures and all sorts of VIP important people from different spiritual traditions that were saying like, no, I believe this is good. This doesn't contradict Buddhism. I'm going to have my consciousness uploaded into a superior body when I'm too old to live.
This is this is the notion of biodigital convergence. Essentially, within Kabbalah, and most of, at least from my study, most of the mystery religions seem to stem from Kabbalah in some sense. I mean, even Christianity as well goes further back into the sort of infiltration or infiltrant cult of Jupiter Sabazios or Zeus Sabaoth or Jove Sabazios was another term for him in Cappadocia. So, and it has all of these various cults that have stemmed from Kabbalah, even Masonry, of course, the Grand Architect. It's all surrounding this notion of the demiurge. Now, the demiurge himself, if you we're talking about the Hebrew and its connections to the likes of Greek, ancient Egypt. I mean, of course, you can tie historically the Israelites, the Hebrews, back to the Hyksos. Now, the Hyksos themselves venerated in a sort of syncretic fashion Set, the god of darkness, the opposite of the sun, arguably. But
So
later on,
yeah.
they also with Akhenaten, there was also a sort of veneration of the Aten, the material sun disk. So, of course, his mother was Assyrian and Asiatic, arguably a Hyksos herself. So he had the name the Lord of all things, and of course, now fast forward into today with Yuval Noah Harari, you have the likes of the Internet of all things. So you have all of these confluence of patterns leading to essentially what is a perfection of the soul trap, a
And,
perfection of the recursive
I just
structure
want
of
to
the world.
finish what I was
Sorry,
saying
jump in.
before
Yeah,
before the conversation goes too far. Is that okay?
sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Just I'm going back to what I was getting at, because this conversation, I see it's going to go that way, and I don't want to bring it back all the time. So what I noticed about the soul trap was that there seems to be ancient technology where human beings could have their souls fed into technology, literally. And that would connect to the angels and demonic realms and other entity realms. So I see this AI as being what AI will be humans that gave up their bodies. Only it won't be your soul. It will be a copy, a blueprint copy of your consciousness
Yep.
that is put onto chip
Yep.
and owned as propriety by AI companies that will then utilize your consciousness. They will create a copy of you, and you will then be forced, by controlling your neuro algorithms, giving parameters like Tron, they will be able to utilize, I think, humans. So the AI that they've got now is just to prepare us for being used to the AI. The moment they convince people to start downloading and going in, and they own the propriety of this consciousness, I think we will see a next level AI, which will be human intelligence. And they might even be able to merge these different human intelligences into a bigger one. And I think this is how they powered their crafts in ancient times. The Vimanas were said to be intelligent. These crafts from ancient times were said to be intelligent. The human intelligence, it was a living being that powered this craft. So they could have been using human soul consciousness to download it into technology and utilize that as a form of advanced AI. And that could be where this Kabbalah comes from. And it goes right back to ancient Babylon. And I think that what we see when we talk about these Ark of the Covenant could be a remnants of that technology. Sorry to, so please continue. Silas, you were talking about the Jupiterian cults and the soul convergence and soul trap as it's being reshaped from a political narrative.
To be succinct about it, what it appears to be, from my study, is that through a digital inventory system, if you will, like what you were mentioning, a biodigital system where all souls are converged within it, that we are almost controlled in the sort of sigils of the circuitry. So it's almost they become the demiurge, or the demiurge is merely manifested digitally. the demiurge itself, I mean, I don't look at that as an entity. I look at it as a force or a principle. Perhaps, of course, it could be with the mythologies like Shem Yaza, the Book of Enoch, and of course, there's this repeats constantly. This sort of same motif throughout most mythologies. This fallen angel idea, this fallen state of man, this fallen state of the world. Perhaps civilization itself stemmed from this as a pattern of control and domestication of the human being. I think with the age that we're going into, and Kabbalah talks about this with the 6th millennium, and it seems to align with this notion of the Aquarian age, that there will be a total bifurcation of the species. Those who can transcend the bounds of the digital prison, the panopticon system, they will be granted some level, I guess, of freedom or emancipation. But then there appears to be another, well, Kabbalah calls it, the Zohar calls them the Klippa, the husks. So there appears to be another category of people that will be completely lost, mere vehicles for possession. Yeah.
Yeah, that clipot is interesting. You wanted to say something, Zerilat.
Yeah, you know what? There were so many things going on. I wasn't sure what was appropriate to bring back up. A thought that was coming to mind was there was a beautiful, I'm actually thinking there were 2 TV shows from 2 different time periods that actually covered this whole AI digital transference thing very well. The first one that I was actually thinking of is the more recent example, which was one particular episode from the reboot of the X-Files, which I think was the short-lived season 10. And in season 10, there was an episode that the Lone Gunmen made their appearance. And one of the guys in the Lone Gunmen, I think it was the Men in Black or whatever, they got him and they put him into the digital convergence, and so the digital copy of him is talking to them and letting him know that he is dead and that he is not him. He is just an exact copy of him, and talking about that the hell that it is because he can't taste anything, he can't smell anything because there's no code in existence that humans have made for taste and smell, and touch. And so he's living in a numbness of hell. And the same thing is conveyed in a 1990s anthology episode of something where a guy is dying. It's kind of like before the movie that they did with Johnny Depp. This was one episode that was the same thing. A guy is dying and he's working in it privately on a computer, and he's just like, I'm going to live forever in this computer. And so that way I can see my daughter grow up and all that stuff. And he dies at the end of the episode. He's in, and he's also in the same exact hell that's explained in the X-Files episode. And I think the episode ends with him begging his daughter to pull the plug. And so it ends on a sad note.
That's interesting. Looking at this, and you mentioned the clipot, and you mentioned this bio-digital convergence. And I've always felt that, you mentioned the Kabbalah. And I always say to people that the Kabbalah is related to the formation of language, is related to the formation of the 22 original characters that were carved. So when the Torah is talking about the original 22 characters that are being carved, they are not talking about the Hebrew language. They're talking about the original 22. So the Paleo-Hebrew, but technically the Phoenician. So the Phoenician original 22 characters, before then there was no 22 characters. There was pictures and there was Akkadian. And that's what there was. And the Akkadian does not have 22 characters. It's a far more complex. So the 22 characters started with a Phoenician. And so the basis of that 22 characters being created according to the Torah is the beginnings of this, like the writing and the understanding of the principles of God, shall we say. So when they speak about that, the Kabbalah effectively is, we're going back to Phoenician language. And where the Phoenician language comes from, or the original 22 profound archetypes upon which those characters are based. So it's older than the Phoenician language, because the Phoenician language was created out of the Kabbalah. So we've got to beg the question: how old is the Kabbalah? What we call the Kabbalah. And the Kabbalah, I mean, if we look at the word, it means from, well, it's got different nuances of meaning, but in its origins, it has to do with mouth to ear. Yeah, mouth to ear. So it basically means speech. If you want to translate the word Kabbalah, speech is probably spoken word communication is probably a good way to translate it. And so that's why it was never written down. So it's very interesting that we've got these ideas related to the Kabbalah, related to ancient technology, going back to Babylon and before, wherever Babylon came from, probably that existed. So this notion that in the Kabbalah there's ancient technology, one can only imagine that whoever built the pyramids had this technology. And so we must be speaking, according to the pyramids, we must be speaking somewhere between 10 and 12,000 years, I'm guessing. Only because there are some pyramids where, for example, pyramids that have the same structure off the coast of Japan where there's coral on it. And they can measure how long coral takes to grow and how many layers of coral growth and different growth on the pyramid, and they can estimate those pyramids to being between 10 and 12,000 years old. Or sorry, that it was underwater for about that period of time. So the pyramids must be that old or older. I mean, if that pyramid's the same dimensions, the same building style as the pyramids in Egypt, and now we find them. Do you know there are a lot of pyramids in South Africa?
Mm-hmm.
There are pyramids in China, Eastern Europe,
Yeah.
Europe, all across the North America, all across the South America, all across. There are pyramids in Africa. Like I don't think there's anywhere on Earth where there aren't pyramids. So there must have been some huge super culture on Earth with high technology that spanned the whole Earth. And they put their pyramids everywhere. And so it stands to reason, if these pyramids were everywhere and they seem to have some effect on electricity and energy and electromagnetism, they must have been somehow used for technology, right? For either generating, like Tesla coils can, as far as we've been told, pull energy out of the cosmos, right? The air, within the air, there's an electrical potential. So what is the electrical potential? I think the electrical potential is, it can get up to, like, if you go as high as a 10-story building, I think the electrical potential gets up to about 20,000 volts. Am I right? Have you guys done the look at it? It's a considerable, it goes up every meter, and it goes up a lot. And it becomes more and more and more the higher you get from the earth. So having big structures that can act as an aerial, and I'm guessing that there would have been a capstone on top of the pyramid that was metallic. And I'm guessing that those lines that we see running through the pyramid must have somehow had ways to conduct the current down, and there always seems to be water underneath the pyramid, or either passages where there could have been running water, which has a diamagnetic. So you can see how the pyramids could have been used to generate current. And so maybe that was how we generated electricity for our technology in the ancient times. I mean, it's just one of the possible ideas that seems credible. Yeah. Regardless, they seem to be everywhere. So this ancient culture that was on the planet.
Panels. For all we know, they had solar panels slapped on that thing. You know, because you would have limestone finish. And what if that wasn't even the top layer? What if there was then stuff that they put on the limestone or carved into the limestone, right? You know, grooves for water to come down. Just like, that's pretty simple engineering at that point.
I guess you're right. It was probably coated in metals, probably rare earth metals, probably superconductive metals.
Yeah. As well as probably things that made it shiny.
I get that. I bet they would have looked. Can you
Because
imagine what they looked like in their days?
why are they calling it fire in the middle? They probably wanted to illuminate the city, so it was probably in part a giant light bulb. And
That's
so
an
the
interesting
city would be
concept.
built around it.
That
It's
supplied power as well. Yeah, I can
It's
see that.
interesting. From the Hyksos, from the ancient Egyptian records, it mentions in one record that I think this is from contemporary to the time of the Hyksos. So we're talking about, according to official history, the 16th, 17th century BC. And it mentions that it was actually a Hyksos leader, I believe, that built the pyramids. Now, of course, I don't necessarily believe that, but it's funny because even the entire geometric shape of the pyramid, and like what you're saying, Bush Whisperer, you see this pyramidal shape found throughout. It's cross-cultural. It's found throughout the world. But interestingly, that even links back to what the Kabbalah mentions within the Zohar and other books, other Kabbalistic tomes, where it mentions that the Kabbalah, another name for it is the three-column system. So you get into the notion of this idea of the Saturn-Moon matrix as it appears both on the tarot card as we see with the Moon Tarot card, and also in terms of the zodiac. So Saturn is that third, and arguably hidden or unknown or ineffable column in the middle between the entrance and exit way to and from the world of matter, which is of course symbolized as the moon. That's also the same within the Buddhist tradition as well. So perhaps that's why that is the generative symbol. Also, the pyramid as well is a symbol. A geometric symbol also can be used to geometrically map or convey the idea of time and the multifaceted nature of time. And I guess you could say the multiverse idea or multiverse theory, the various threads all emanating or radiating from the one source. So there's all these concepts linked in with the pyramid too. But we know that the ancient Egyptian religion was, effectively it was a sort of proto-Gnostic religion, wasn't it? The way that they viewed this world, the way that they viewed this life, even the way that they viewed death. So the relationship that they had with that philosophically was, more aligned with Gnosticism as we know it. Again, as an umbrella term. Really, what is Gnosticism,
Yeah, man. I just did a little bit of hunting while I was there, and I came out with pretty much the answer. And so there it is. You guys can see it. It's 100 volts per meter, and the pyramid was 137 meters high, right? So that means that at the top of the pyramid, there was 13,700 volts.
137, which is I think that's the golden section, isn't it?
And it's a lot of volts, huh?
Mm. It's it's interesting how close that that's almost right on top of 138, and there's a lot of numerology revolving around 138 that is intriguing, and there's a few YouTubers out there that talk about it.
Yeah, and like you were saying just a minute ago, what was it that you were talking about? You were talking about the I can't think of the name. Silas, you're talking about this culture that basically from whence a lot of this information is coming from.
Well, the Hyksos. I mean, even
Yes.
this goes back to the Babylonians as well. Another name for the Hyksos, who were the shepherd kings, who invaded from the east. Again, they were a Semitic people, like the Amorites. The Amorites and the Babylonians are essentially synonymous. So, yeah, another name for the Hyksos in the ancient Egyptian records was the Amu or the Amar. So essentially, the Amorites. So the Amorites themselves, they birthed really what is the Western Semitic languages and cultures. So Phoenician, Aramaic, and Canaanite. I mean, both. Well, for example, Aramaic derives etymologically from a Semitic word meaning highland, so denoting the highland Amorites. And then, of course, Canaanite, I believe, derives from a word meaning lowland or plains. So the lowland Amorites, that's what that's denoting. So the Aramaics and the Canaanites were connected. They were both off the Amorite line.
The
Jump
the
in, yeah.
chain of
Sorry.
continuity was broken with the 18th dynasty. There was these bloodlines coming from the outside right in. So I'm just backing up what you're saying, Silas.
I agree. I totally agree. That
Yeah.
was with the line of Akhenaten and Tutmosis III.
Yeah, because Akhenaten's son takes over. That's he's Seti.
Mhm.
He's named after Set, right? Who is Set? Set is a god of foreigners, as well as various other things that you've mentioned and that we know of. And he is the jackal. Anubis Anpu is not a jackal. He's the black wolf. He's a short-haired black wolf.
Yes, yes. And also as well, the Hyksos, this is another connection with the Amorites and the Hebrews. There was this veneration of the donkey as an animal. You find that the Typhonian beast,
Yes.
also potentially a jackal previously, as the Egyptians saw him as, prior to the Hyksos invasions in the 17th century BC. The Hyksos eventually changed that. It was very gradual, or it appears to be gradual, at least from the archaeological evidence, into a donkey. So the Setian animal became a donkey, or donkey-headed at least.
Yes.
So you have all of these connections as well.
Right, right. Which is what happens to the lost children on Pleasure Island in Pinocchio. They all are turned into jackasses by their
Bingo.
their behavior. You know what? I think I closed the page. I didn't. I put it over here. While we are turning things around on you, Jesus etymology actually breaks down to the earthly pig. That's how it actually breaks down. I have a short article on it that I can read real fast. So let me get it down to the passage. So when considering the prefix, we find that je is another form of ge, derived from the Latin Greek word for earth. Ge or je is a short form of Gaia or G, which is the Mother Earth or Roman goddess Tellus. The suffix sus comes from the Latin word for pig, sus. Sus in Latin means pig, like swine, sui, right? Means pig. This is where we get the pig call, sui, right? So in Jesus, if we examine the name Jesus as a compound name, it literally means earthly pig or pig of Tellus, goddess, Mother Earth. It in no way implies or means Yahuwah in salvation.
Very, very interesting. That would also jump
I can
in,
add
Bush
to
was
that.
first, sorry.
Kalki. And Kalki is one of the later embodiments of Vishnu. But one of the other avatara of Vishnu is a pig. And Vishnu represents what Krishna is the embodiment of. So one of Krishna's other forms is the form of a pig. And was it not interesting how when the Catholics saw the Gita, they actually believed that it had been plagiarized from the New Testament? Because there were so many similar notions being expressed in the Gita that they thought that it had been written from the New Testament. So just please do carry on. I just thought I'd add that in. In Vedic cosmology, that adds up too, because the pig is a sacred animal. And in ancient times, I think the pig was sacred because its DNA is the closest to humans. I mean, the only heart that we can live with, Chris Barnard's first heart transplant was a pig. And for a long time, people were getting pig hearts because it's the only animal heart that a human body would accept, DNA-wise.
That is very interesting, because I was just going to bring up a potential connection with Jesus being the earthly pig. And then, of course, even Jesus mentioned that, Jerusalem would be trampled until the time of the Gentiles was finished, completed.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is hearkening to the notion of the final redemption within the Zohar and the Tikkun. But interestingly, the pig directly, again, it's a pretty large book, the Zohar, but I've counted at least over a dozen times that it links Esau, or Rome, just in general, the West, I guess, with the pig. That's very interesting. I was not aware of that etymology of Jesus. That is fascinating.
Yeah, that's some deeply buried stuff. I mean, I'm just like, Jesus is set. Like they roll everything into all the gods. It's ridiculous what these people do.
And it's interesting. I mean, someone here, and Namaste Culty Talk. I hope you're good, man. And they reckon, is this one of the reasons why the pig can't be eaten? Well, it's very interesting because the first thing you notice, for those of you that have been to the burning ghats, you would know this. The first thing you notice when you're by the burning ghats, any of the places where they're burning the bodies in India, they go next to the Ganga. And the first thing you smell is it smells like pork. So when a human body is cremated, or maybe our cremations are such high temperatures that maybe it vaporizes the, the terpenes. But if it's traditionally burnt with fire, right, then what you end up with is the smell of pork. So there's a verse in the New Testament where swine are used as a vessel into which to project the demon that's possessing that man, right?
All right.
And
Jesus did
their closeness to humans. We can get diseases, a cold, a common cold. I can't give my dog a cold, but I can give a pig a cold, and a pig can give me a cold. And the things that live in my body live in a pig's body, and the things that live in a pig's body live in my body. So if there's any disease in the pig, I can get that disease very easily because of how close our DNA is.
Yeah.
Where we don't have that with other animals.
The biggest thing is the diet of the pig. Eating swine is perfectly fine. Our ancestors did it for ages, especially in the north. The pig was one of those things. It's part of why the wild boar is associated with Freyr, hunting boar, and then we would eat the boar. But the pig is an omnivore. We do not eat from that which has partaken of flesh. We do not eat predators. We do not eat scavengers. So we have to make sure that the pig is not given the option. The pig's not gonna. I think the pig is a scavenger as an omnivore, so it doesn't go after like someone that's alive, unless they've been trained, like we've seen in the movie. And you have to be incapable of defending yourself because it's a fucking pig. It's got very little mobility, right? It's just like it waddles around like a pug dog or whatever, right? So it kind of has to be a scavenger by that merit. So it's not that hard to keep them at a proper vegetarian diet, right? And I think that this is why they just forbid pork altogether, because I think they were finding a big problem in their world of because of what? Guess what? You're in the desert. You're in the wasteland. If you can't feed them like grass, you're gonna have to feed them like the leftovers of what you hunt, the stuff you don't eat from your hunt, stuff like that, right? So they're going to end up eating meat. And so now you can't use them to eat for yourself.
And another thing I noticed, like when I lived in the Himalayas, because I spent like a big chunk of my life out there, was the indigenous cows are very different to the indigenous to the cows that we have these days in the West. Indigenous horses are very different to the horses that we breed. Indigenous pigs, different. I lived in different jungles. I lived in Sri Lankan jungle as well. And so I actually got to know the wild pigs really well. By wild, I'm talking about wild boar, right? So I used to frequently have run-ins with them. And I tell you what, man, that's one animal you will never, ever, ever, ever pick a fight with, right? Like I was prepared to fight a leopard. The Sri Lankan leopard is huge, and I reckon I would probably be taken down, but I've got pretty fast reflexes, and I've got if I catch it with a shot, I could probably break its jaw. So I mean, I was trained. I was a championship fighter.
I've seen a herd.
I would never I would never ever take on a wild boar because I wouldn't stand a chance. They are so fast. They are so powerful. They've got tusks like this.
I know,
huge tusks.
I was shocked when I saw how fast they could run. It was just like
they are fast, man. They are vicious as well. They come at you. You've just got to literally calm down and just stand your ground. Just be calm. They're actually not aggressive, but when they see you, they run at you and they kick the ground and they make this big snorting sound. And they weigh about 150, 200 kilos at least. It's like a pit bull that's the size of a Malamute. You know how a pit bull's tiny, but they weigh like 35 kilos? I had pit bulls. They're beautiful dogs.
Right.
Now imagine a pit bull that's like this big.
Got it. Yeah.
With those bones. I once had to smack my pit bull on the head because she had my other dog at the throat, right? And she was killing her. And I was like trying to get them apart. The hose pipe was over there, and I had to hit her really, really hard. And like I would have broken a man's jaw with that strike. But like, you know, she just recoiled. Luckily, she let go of Kelly, and I managed to split up the fight. But you know, those little pit bulls are pretty tough. Their head bone, if you look at the way their head's bones, they've got thick bones around the head. Eh?
Oh yeah.
Now imagine a wild boar. Like seriously, this creature, if it wanted to, it could be a lethal hunter. But it's actually quite a they're quite intelligent. And people say pigs are dirty. The reason those pigs are always waddling in the mud is because they don't want to have germs on them. They don't want to have fleas and ticks, and they're actually extremely clean creatures.
But they're healthy. That's funny about it, right? Because they're in good dirt. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think like the pigs that the ancient people had would have been different to the pigs that we've been breeding for the last who knows how long. Because we've specifically bred all the weak pigs, didn't we? We bred the weak pigs that can't run away until they became pink and, like you say, waddling around like they couldn't run away from you even if they wanted to.
Right. Yeah, these were, this was because we went into animal husbandry, right? The Bach Saga has explanations for all of that stuff. As but after the Paradise time, there wasn't enough just being given up by the earth anymore because of the way there were now dry seasons in the equator area, right? So some form of agriculture and animal husbandry had to be established to make there be enough food and enough, auxiliary help for labor, such as the cattle and things like that. And then that's when the breeding programs started doing a great deal things, and there's a lot of, according to the Box Saga, there's basically a lot of missing links in the breeding program, but they started selective breeding the goats in a certain way, and then the goats eventually transformed into most of your domestic farm animals that we're all familiar with around the world.
So getting back to the death thing, were you going to say something, Silas?
Oh no, I was just going to say as well, even with civilization itself is almost selectively bred humans into the same sort of domesticated trappings. But yeah, sorry, please.
Yeah, I was going to say, getting back to the living and dying thing, you know, and I think like it's quite relevant, you know, how our ideas of death and life have shaped. And many of I think because of modern times, there are very strange ideas about the afterlife. Because most of the people that speak about the afterlife were in hospitals on morphine, right? And basically tripping balls and having a crazy kind of lucid dream experience while they were half in their bodies and half out of their bodies. And so we've got all these like really interesting ideas of the afterlife. And then of course this is also based upon our algorithm control systems. So we've been exposed to certain ideas, and I think it's not by accident, because like I drowned when I was 3 and I crossed over, and what I experienced is not like what all these other people talk about, sitting having conversations with angels. No, the world turned inside out and it was just sound. The whole universe was just sound. It was vibrations. And the sound got louder and louder and louder. And the louder and faster the sound got, the further I was being taken from my body, from the pool where I drowned. And the louder it got, the more I started to realize that I was forgetting. And then I observed my mind being pulled out of me. Three ribbons being pulled apart. And they were like my thoughts. And I was like, oh no, that's where the terror set in. These were my memories being taken, unraveled, taken from me. And my father, and I was trying not to forget my father. You try not to forget the people you love. And those memories get stripped out of you. And then you burst through like a bubble. And you're in the next layer of substance. And it's like, it feels like you're in an inside out dome, and that there's like a fishbowl. It looks like a fishbowl of like translucent light. And the closer you're getting to the light, you're starting to remember where you were before you were here. Now, I was 3 years old. I had no idea about religion, no idea about the after. There were no preconceived anything. So I was a little child. And I remember when I had all these, so I was 3 years old, and when my 3-year-old mind was stripped away from me, I was an adult. How does that work? I'm in a different level of consciousness now. And I'm remembering, oh my gosh, how did they trick me to come in here? We don't belong here. This is not our place. Thank God I'm going back home. And in that moment, I'm starting to go through this layer, and I'm starting to remember, that's my home. I'm coming home, and I'm so happy. And then I sense Mariki and looking for me. And I sense she's going to go and take my body. And I immediately fly back down there. And as I fly down, all this density stuff comes and sticks to me again. It's like stick. And I'm trying to stop her. Coming back, I'm trying to stop her, saying, no. Leave me, I'm happy. And she's going into the water to get my body out and doing CPR on my body. And so by the time they got me to the hospital, I was already coming back into my body, and I was like very shaken up, but I wasn't the same. So then I was like a 3-year-old, 4-year-old in the creche that would draw a circle in the sand and sit in my circle cross-legged, and none of the children would come near my circle. It was my circle. I didn't know anything about magic circles. I didn't know anything about this, but I had like all sorts of intense experiences, and I would sit in my circle, and I remember the teacher coming to ask me if I was unhappy, and I said, no, I'm fine. I'm thinking. And she was like, well, are you unhappy? And I said, no, I'm happy. She was, don't you want to play with the other children? I was like, look at them. Why didn't you play with them? They're rolling around in the dirt. What's the point of that? And she was like, yeah, but like, what are you thinking? And I said to her, well, I'm thinking about how every adult is too scared to live their lives because everybody's so afraid of dying, and how this fear of being dead stops people from actually being themselves. And she was so freaked out by this because this is a 4-year-old kid telling you what he's thinking about. And it was something which she had never thought about, a very adult thought. I was sitting there as a 4-year-old in my little circle with my circle around me, contemplating the nature of life and death and why it is everybody so afraid of dying, and how that's such a heavy inhibition and how it sort of makes everybody unhappy. And I can see all these adults, they're so unhappy, and look at how messed up their kids are. Their kids are so messed up that they have to roll around in the dirt to act out this weird mental stuff of their fathers and their mothers, and so they can't like see. So when you cross over, you become someone else. You're not the you that you were when you were alive. And so it sort of begs the question of like who we are while we're alive, right? The spirit of living. Who are we? Are we actually who we are, or have we become what we're meant to be, what we're made to be? So I thought I'd put that out to you guys, like this idea of life and death, and the Kabbalah, and these notions of the afterlife. And if we think about the Shemitic knowledge coming from ancient Egypt, right? The language of Paleo-Hebrew came from ancient Egypt. The culture came from ancient Egypt. How could they not have believed what ancient Egyptians believed, which was so focused on the afterlife? It seems to me that there has been a cultural misappropriation and reappropriation of fundamental knowledge that has been specifically omitted, hidden, or changed. And I think this is why we don't see the Jewish people in modern times speaking about the real roots, which seems to be in ancient Egypt. What do you guys think about that?
I think we got the mystery traditions, right? And so I think that we're not 100% sure yet exactly what we know about Egypt that is occulted and esoteric to us today was exoteric or esoteric in its time. What was within the mystery school, which you might as well back then have been an equivalency to top secret government documents, right? What was the exoteric way of things, the way that was officially put out by Pharaoh, and what was the deal in the underlying meaning by those that it was their dharma, their orlog to practice in the mystery and to be going on the leading edge of consciousness the way that we do openly here in the public internet forum.
Yeah, I think as well is again we can't really be totally sure of what they believed. I mean, we can only go on hunches based upon archaeological evidence and really what is extant within records that have been translated by others. But I would say as time has progressed, of course, everything is contained within world ages, cycles within cycles. And of course, that every tradition known to man essentially states the same thing. The cyclicality of time, that the nature of time itself is it's a repetitive, circular spiral, like quality or structure that encompasses it. So I think honestly, as we have gradually progressed, I guess you could say, into the Kali Yuga, into this sort of dark age from the ancient Egyptian period, which, you know, arguably is quite long, but religion itself has really became a way in which the priest class sequester knowledge from the masses, and it's a way in which death is injected into the minds of the fear of death is injected into the minds of the masses. And moreover as well, of course it's a control mechanism, but it's also a way to keep people locked again in this sort of circularity of time, but a circularity of time which is controlled almost artificially by, I don't know, an informed minority. So, like what you were saying, I think that the exoteric previously was probably the esoteric. It was something that was revealed, at least on a larger scale, to the population in more ancient times, and it's become far more exoteric. And the revealed religion itself is basically a watered down milk toast version of the truth, which you could say is ultimately a lie. I mean, it's an obfuscation of the truth. It's something that leads nowhere. It leads to a dead end.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot to look at. Like, um, it seems that like something happened in the 1700s and the 1800s from probably all of our research, and we can see how the ball has moved and how our history has been resculpted. I mean, anybody with an ancient, well, not an ancient, sorry, anybody with an encyclopedia from the 1700s or the 1800s can read up about this big state called Tartaria. Or it was called Tartari, sorry, I think. It's been years. Like I saw it when I was a kid. But anyway, you know, it was in this encyclopedias. So and there's a lot of other stuff that's been hidden from us. I think, like, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. We know that they acknowledge openly that they fixed the calendar, right? That they had to adjust the calendar because there had been a mistake, and in good faith, we're supposed to trust them that they only added the some number of days that they say they added. Could be right, but maybe they added a whole lot more years.
It was the Mongolian Empire. They just changed the name to the Mongolian Empire because the Tatars were a well-known, prominent tribe in the Mongolian Empire, and I believe there's something up with the name Mongolian. The history of that name might be a little dubious, but it was basically the Tartaries had had a huge what were like kind of like a big part of it, and it was named after them basically. And there's not and like their history has been effing erased. Mongolian Empire's history's been erased. It's been reduced to nothing more than military campaigns and palace intrigue, and nothing of consequence happened for thousands of years. Or hundreds.
Yeah, and these old buildings, like that big war that we saw in Eastern Europe recently,
Yeah.
right? Like there were a lot of old buildings there.
Because think about it, if it's the Mongolians, right? What were they? Buddhists. Lamaism is the legacy of the Mongolian Empire. The Dalai Lama is basically the Mongolian emperor. It's like the Pope, right? So imagine the Dalai Lama had Buddhist sound tech. And that was one aspect of what we think Tartaria was, which is not accurate for what that tech was to us, because I think it was a technology standard of the time that wasn't all Tartaria. I think that we all kind of had it. Imagine if you saw an automobile as an artifact and you'd forgotten the automobile. You would have looked at this thing with four wheels. It was all over the world. And they would have said Oldsmobile, the Oldsmobile Empire, right? And somebody would have just thought there was like one guy who owned all the cars and he owned the world because his cars were everywhere, right? That's kind of the mistake we're making with the Tartarian theory. And it's what makes the narrative look foolish to rational historians, anthropologists, and archaeologists.
How big were those two statues that were destroyed by the Taliban in 2001? Do you remember? Buddhist statues that weren't supposed to be there, a part of history that we're not supposed to know about.
Yeah.
And they quickly went and lowered men down the cliffs and planted bombs and dynamite and everything, right? And
they were huge.
blew them up.
Yeah.
That was the Taliban. The Taliban did that. You said,
I believe it was the Taliban that blew up the Buddhist statues, and I do know that a lot of the military campaigns out in Iraq have been on ancient sites, just setting up bases. I mean,
you're not confusing this with the ISIS vandalisms, are you?
I believe it was the Taliban. Am I right or wrong?
No, it's the Buddhas of Bamyan.
Yeah, it was the Taliban leader, Mullah Muhammad Omar, to destroy all the statues in Afghanistan so that no one can worship or respect them in the future. So Afghanistan was full of them. There were like loads of these ancient Buddhist statues there that contradicts the so-called narrative of this is a Muslim country.
They're
big statues.
They're erasing the Aryan history of the area, because Afghanistan and Iran are kind of the same situation. Zoroastrian stuff is spread across there. It's a Persianism in that whole area because of the Persian Empire's time.
Yes, it's the encroachment of, I guess you could call it Abrahamism, but even the idea of Abrahamism itself is it almost appears as though they were designed to annihilate this knowledge of the world ages, the age that had came previously. And you even see this within the Zohar. So in the 7th millennium, it actually talks about that these world ages occur within 6 steps, which are 6 millennium, pardon. So the 6th millennium being ending. So you have 6 millennia of civilization, and then the finality, the reset age is the 7th millennium. And it talks about in the 7th millennium that heaven and earth will be reset, essentially remade anew. So it's almost like what you see with Islam and its incursions into the Hindu Kush and the destructions of vast cornucopias of libraries and knowledge and all of this. That was all burnt to a crisp, similar to what occurred as well with Christianity within the folk traditions of Europe. Again, it was to destroy everything, to sanitize it, to sterilize, almost to get rid of the knowledge, the folk wisdom of these previous civilizations and of the nature of time itself. The world ages.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm looking up here, and in Mosul, at the Nergal Gate, there was an Assyrian site where there were Buddhist statues. This is in Iraq, that were being destroyed. So they've been like systematically getting rid of all the Buddhist history, and these are ancient sites. And those statues, by the way, in Afghanistan, they were giants, hey? Like
Yeah.
I don't know how big they were, but I believe they were not small statues.
No. Yeah, they were okay. Iraq. If we're talking about Iraq, that's going to be
Those weren't the giants. Those were just
yeah.
Buddhist statues.
Okay. All right. I was
Assyrian
saying,
from
Iraq
Assyrian.
would probably be related to the Sunni Shia issue.
No, I think it goes back further than that. It's the ancient Assyrian site, an archaeological site where they were uncovering Buddhist statues.
Right. But all I'm saying is that one of those two of the major Islamic political groups of Iraq might have done that as a terrorist act, akin to how the left destroyed Confederate statues, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
But it makes you wonder whether these Taliban groups, like, we know who funded the Taliban originally, right? We know where Osama bin Laden was trained. We know that he was connected to the CIA, right? I believe he was an operative originally, right? There's records of him. And bin Laden, very close ties to the CIA. Bin Laden oil families, very close tie with the oil baron families of America.
Alias Timothy Osman.
Sorry?
Osama bin Laden's alias is Timothy Osman.
Oh, you mean his real name?
No, I believe that's how he interfaced with the CIA, was under Timothy Osman.
Right. So, like, it makes you wonder whether there was some global conspiracy that involved all the Western Bloc countries like MI5, MI6, and CIA, and probably Mossad, and operatives being planted in to start these political uprising movements and weaponize within the country unsatisfied people, unhappy with the occupation of their lands, in order to start civil war proceedings, because that would give a reason to go over there and have a war, right?
Mm-hmm.
And while you were over there having a war, you would get cheap opium, because like morphine's a big seller, right? And the pharmaceutical industry is the second biggest industry in the world. So if you got cheap morphine, these corporations have got serious investment into funding a war. So they're like, well, we'll do R&D for like germ warfare for you if you can get us to get cheap prices for morphine, because the money we're going to make off the morphine will cover the investments that we can invest into your war machine. And so there's a financial incentive. And I think, like, getting back to the whole life and death notion, like the death of grace, the death of decency, the internet, like the way that our culture has been shaped because of this internet. We've lost touch with each other. Cultural distance. Most people don't know their neighbors. Most people have lost the community. When I was a child, there was still community. Like, we saw our neighbors, we got to know our neighbors. Like, there are still places in the world where this happens. Where I live right here is one of those places, but we don't have 5G where I live. There's no cell phone coverage here, hardly any cell phone coverage. So, like, I can only use my fiber line in order to stay connected. When my fiber line drops, I've got no communication. I had a problem with a client 2 days ago because of this, right?
I think that also sometimes we can feel really uncomfortable around each other because our local living arrangements are set by like housing and apartment market dynamics, right? And so there's going to be all sorts of people that got nothing to do with your interests that are going to be living next door. And by that, I mean, when you're like us, you're really deep. It's just like, there's a certain level of, I can't relate to what you're talking about. I'd have to get to know all sorts of things. It's just like, because I wouldn't have time if I didn't kind of go through the hermit card, right? And I think because people got forced into a shallow world, and those that were in denial that it was a shallow world got trapped into all the aversions to admitting that the world was shallow, so they can continue to play in the shallow mind and just have their little groups and whatever is sufficient for their personal stimulus, right? But those of us that are, you know, have been going through this process of losing all sorts of friends and associates and you know, and various hits, because you want to openly, you know, put out into the world who you are, as well as the fact that who you are is has this direct relationship to what you're talking about out there, even though you're not talking about yourself, but yet you are a product of a life you live that got you interested in this subject. And then the craziest thing happened when you did that. You found out that other people actually do care, right? Because I think we're also living in a time where, okay, your neighbors don't want to listen to you that much, and they don't mean it to be one way or the other, but also, you know, that you need a lot of time to get to the point where they understand what the hell you're talking about. Somebody with no true concept of how bad things are with history can easily frame all aspects of this conversation that we've had tonight is incredibly anti-Semitic and satanic, and, you know, all the bad words that get all the buzz attention with the gatekeepers, right? And they are still fighting to keep certain things in that uncomfortable, I think you're a man of terrible character kind of framework, right? And so people are looking for they're looking for their opiate from life, or they're looking for their mastery of life, and we're the masters, and they're on the opiate because they can't handle it.
I think as well that you know, extrapolating from what you stated, it's almost like the more connected we have become digitally, the more atomized we have become in real life. And it's very strange now with the culture and really just society in general, all across the West, in fact, all across the world, really, where you have these cultures and these societies that are going through this mass, you know, transmutation, where they're being broken down and remade anew into this sort of digital vision. And it really, they're societies and cultures that are perhaps, again, from the very mundane level of it, pop culture and such, and the masses, it's a society that is as wide as an ocean, but is you know, shallow as a puddle. So a lot of people really, because with the advent of the internet and the popularization of it, there has been a sort of fashionability and a corralment where people have been completely sanitized. And because of the globalization of everything, we don't really base our opinions now, or even our views, our worldviews, our ideas around, you know, a sort of exclusive, very localized culture and geography and community. We have these parasocial groups now, and we conform our entire belief structures to these larger sort of, I guess you could call it blocks of thought form. And of course, the problem with the internet as well is that the discourse can be easily steered. You know, well, here's a for instance. This is how you know the social media itself is designed to control the mind. If you look back at the formation of Facebook, you had in the early 2000s DARPA creating something called the LifeLog. When the LifeLog ended, because obviously whistleblowers were, well, essentially coming out and mentioning to the public what was going on here, they were trying to create, in essence, a social media platform. Of course, it wasn't called that back then. I think it was called a user-generated knowledge database, where it would do the heavy lifting for the intelligence agencies. The users would do that themselves for the intelligence agencies. The day that ended in 2004 was the day that Facebook started up, coincidentally, of course, right? So it's we've been conditioned very gradually, very slowly into this sort of digital system. I mean, even the term digital, the digits on one's hand, it's this idea of the isolated, I guess you could say, self-same thought forms and concepts and ideologies. And there's a very small minority, of course, we're amongst them, that can see through this, that sees the world from a higher vantage point. And it's very difficult. You almost have to become two-faced or to enter a sort of schizophrenic mindset to try and engage with a lot of the masses, because, well, ultimately they just care about the mundane. If you try to have any sort of deeper connection with them, well, they would probably become violent, wouldn't they?
Yeah, Facebook, of course, started out as the Harvard connection, right? And I can't remember if Zuckerberg started the Harvard connection or Harvard asked him to come in and take over the Harvard connection. And that's when it became the Facebook as the inter-Harvard network system. And so while they were taking that database system and getting ready to phase it out, they were going to put that technological infrastructure, that idea was getting poured into the Facebook, and they used their Ivy League students as their test subjects to see how it would run, right? So Mark Zuckerberg was handed an entire university to work his platform. He is, there is nothing in my garage about this motherfucker, right? That neither Bill Gates, but at least they were lying to us. This time they didn't lie to us, right? I suppose that's supposed to be better, but it's also kind of a sign that things are worse because we're just going to accept, I'll trust the Ivy League guy. So we just hadn't learned our lessons yet because we were trusting horrible people. Horrible people. And as long as we thought Zuckerberg was an all right guy, he kind of became the inventor of the NPC mindset by the level of social engineering he can do with that platform as a service under the regulations of telecommunications in the federal government, as per whichever political influence is playing center stage this season.
Let me dig up a little bit of dirt here for a moment, right? You guys might find this quite interesting. Mm-hmm. Now, I've known about
digital
this.
Convergence. Facebook would be the place to put the soul.
Well, I think it's a big part of the conditioning for our brains to get us ready. So what's the substance of the claim that can you guys see this on the screen? No, you can't. Oh, let me put it up on the screen. So yeah, we can take a look at it, and I'll make it big so everybody can see it and take a look at where this comes from. This is actually something that's really quite well known. And it's not new. We were discussing this 15 years ago on Facebook before it was what it's become when I was still using Facebook. Yeah.
I love it. All right. I automatically believe it.
Yeah, this In-Q-Tel company, which is a venture capital company run by the CIA, funded by the CIA. Its purpose was to finance companies that could benefit the CIA. They were a website where they list companies that they've invested in. A lot of them are companies that make tools that would help intelligence analysts deal with the information information glut problems, search technologies, mapping technologies, Keyhole, the precursor to Google Earth, was In-Q-Tel company. And In-Q-Tel is a venture capital firm that invests in technology. They naturally need a board of directors that made up of people with experience in that field. This is necessary unless you want the tax dollars to basically be completely mismanaged. So the first CEO was a venture capitalist named Gilman Louis, and you can go and track this guy. You can research it. I did a lot of this research, like I say, back in the days before Google was what it is. I don't know if you can find this information as easily these days. Now, they also speak about how he was on the board for NVCA, for those of you that want to go and take a look. And another board member was James Breyer, who runs a very successful venture capital firm called ACIL Partners. He has a list of these, so you can go and take a look. I'll put this link up on the screens here, and it's all like it's carefully done. It's made to be difficult to track, but CIA owned this company, and this company had a lot of companies. So the money that actually came to Zuckerberg came through one of these subsidiary companies owned by these companies. That just happens to be where the cash track came from, because these were venture capitalists that invest in new tech companies. And Facebook was a new tech company that happened to be invested in by one of the portfolio companies owned by In-Q-Tel and run by these bunch of cronies. And a lot of these cronies would have been on a lot of the same boards. Like for example, this Louis was also on the board of NVCA while being on the other board. And so these both companies are basically connected. Etsy, by the way, you see here, is also funded by these companies. So they've got their fingers in all sorts of finger holes. And I think it has a lot to do with tracking people, tracking what people are doing, tracking what people are making, tracking the less obvious forms of sales. And it's probably got to do with tax, because Etsy is a company where a lot of small business people will be able to maybe go underneath the tax machine. So this way they can harness information and track information and give it back through other channels, so that, do you know IRS can get hold of you if you're selling on Etsy, as an example. So I think, like, when we look at where Facebook came from, and do you remember how MySpace was? MySpace was doing pretty well, right? And Facebook came with a huge marketing program that basically wiped MySpace out.
The face
I think it took
destroyed
about
the space.
6 months.
The face destroyed the space. I always found it very interesting how.
I mean, Tom freaking sold it to Murdoch, Fox, like the guy who owns Fox. Yeah. I was just like, what? Why would you sell it to the neocons? Like, that was that, so, I mean, maybe Tom was just in a position because the world just was going where it was, because, yeah, man, MySpace, it's fine. I'm fine with Facebook, because I just focus on the networking, but yeah, the beauty of your self-expression by the platform itself is it's just one of the things that makes life, man.
There's also something more ritualistic to mention regarding that In-Q-Tel, and I've heard about them previously, I believe. And even the whole Q thing, does anyone recall that? Just prior to January 6th, the whole sort of Trump craze in the first election. The Q itself, I always found that interesting. Why was it there's a few other places it also has cropped up in relation to the intelligence agencies, the 3-letter agencies. But the Q itself is the 17th letter. And we're talking about the control of data, which is essentially the control of currency. Currency itself, the monetary system, and again, you have all of this maritime terminology with that. It is the control and the steering of the current of the river of time, the river of life. Dataism, as Yuval Noah Harari states it, and with the Internet of All Things, essentially that is another facet of that. It's a continuation of it and an evolution of it from the minds of the autocrats. But if you look at the Star Tarot card, that is exactly what they're doing with social media. Obviously, the star, the female, is the controlling bulwark or fulcrum between the dualism of course of the source of the idea, or the omega pool, if you will. On her right, it would be on our left, and of course the pouring of that onto the land, and it feeding back into the omega pool. So you have this sort of homeostatic system, this negative feedback loop. Ultimately, when you look into dataism, what Yuval Noah Harari is desirous of, what essentially most of the transhumanist thinkers and cyberneticists, all the way back to Norbert Wiener, just in the post-war era, were after. They were after this sort of what they called autopoietic system, which means a self-regulating system, a system that, again, is it's almost akin to the farm, right? It feeds upon its own waste. It's akin as well to the web of the spider and the spider itself. The spider feeds upon the animal of decay, the fly.
Yeah, and 17 reduces to 8. Like I said, the Ouroboros. Yeah. That's it's the net. It's the house of the net. You mesh a bunch of 8s together. You got the mesh of a net. Look at this, 17. This is the I Ching. I'm pulling this from divination.com. Choosing to follow good influences brings supreme success. You may not be able to change the direction of the wind, but by frequent adjusting your sails, you can arrive at your destination with a joy that inspires others to follow you. In short, if Q was a hostile intelligence op, we were looking at mass psychic driving as explained in A Clockwork Shining. Yeah. So psychic driving, right? So you can use I Ching 17 for psychic driving. There's more to this, but I don't want to just sit here and read to you guys. And
that's absolutely astounding. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. I call it as well. Jump in. Sorry.
I was just going to add to that. Like, if you look at the Chaldean, because I always like to look at Chaldean. Something about the way the Chaldean numbers work. So the Chaldean numbers are based upon the Paleo-Hebrew numbers, which has become the Hebrew numbers, which is based upon the Phoenician numerological associations with letters, which is the beginning of language. So Q here would be kof, kwa, kwa. I want you to hear that sound, kof, which relates to 1. I mean, in the Hebrew system, it's the number 100. And resh, re, or the female version of r, is the sound re or r rolls in the front of your head. Just make the sound r, r. It's moving the vibrations to bounce off the front of the spine. Now, if you say ko, 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 the sound echoes backward off the palate and bounces towards the back of the head and touches what we call the Binti chakra. And the Binti chakra is that point. If you see Brahmins, they shave their heads, right? The Brahmacharya, to be specific, which is basically people that they don't do sex, they don't eat garlic or onion, obviously vegetarian lifestyle. They have a very tight set of brahmacharya, and they wear a piece of cotton from hip to shoulder, representing the combat, like, the touching the left and the right, to find that central sort of sattvic way of living. But regardless, this notion of ko related to this sound that touches this chakra is quite important, because, and you can do it for yourself. Ko, feel the sound, move with the sound. Ko. You'll see that the sound resonates in the back of the head. Now, the letter kof in Hebrew, it literally means the back of the head. And so we're talking about the astrological sign of Pisces. And obviously the astrological sign of Pisces thus relates to dreams, relates to interface with the unconscious, and to engaging with unconscious forces. And it's two fishes swimming in opposite directions, right? And so it represents that substance of the unconscious through which we must travel, which is the Maya, the dream state. So when it comes to programming someone, neuro-linguistic programming, you could say, is the art of using linguistic triggers to program someone's unconscious dream state that they're not consciously aware of, but to produce dream currents when they're not awake that will program them so that when they're awake, they will start taking on the patterns of programming that has been linguistically triggered into their consciousness through the unconscious gate. And this is one of the reasons why the brahmacharya have long hair from that point, back of the head, because your hair, it protects you, right? Like, you want to know why shaman don't cut their hair? There's a tradition understood that hair holds power. And what power hair holds is Saturn. And Saturn is the cube. Somebody mentioned the etheric field. Well, Saturn dominates and structures the etheric field. This the cube, that cubic form, which is worshipped in the ceremonial worship of Saturn's, Lord of Time archetype, which is also the reaper of the crops, because food is the number 8, right? I ate something really nice today. I enjoy the food that I ate. And number 8, no coincidence that our language does that, because of Saturn's association with 8 and 8's association with 1. 8 and 1, very interesting. You see, 1 is the perfectionist, and 1 is the archetypal ruler, the leader, the son, the king. But 8 is the artisan. 8 is the perfecter, perfecting their craft, the workaholic, that aspect of drive to be successful, to be famous. That's all in the number 8. But number 1 and number 8 are perfect extensions of each other. And so the black sun, the sun and Saturn, they share this very subtle relationship, which is seemingly being forgotten in modern esoteric circles, but we can see the shadows and echoes of it in the old times. So interesting, how the number 8 in modern numerology and in Chaldean, it goes to number 1. And they're almost like the same way that you've got the sidereal system of astrology in Vedic, measuring from the moon and the earth, as opposed to the solar-based heliocentric model of astrology in the West, which was popular in the Chaldeans' time, and how they are different, but how they equate to each other. If you get a Vedic astrological chart done, it's as fundamentally as purposeful and as useful as getting a Western astrological chart done, even though they're calculating from different points, which is really interesting. They're just looking at it from different perspectives. The Vedic is looking at your past and looking at your karmic imprints and how to work that karmic imprint into the future. And the West is looking at the outcomes in the future and how to backward engineer towards the now from the future. So the one is engineering from the past to the future, and the other one is engineering from the future to the past. But they both meet in the present. Anyway, that's what I thought I'd add.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm very excited. Tomorrow I'm going to be going live with Jin the Ninja from the Occult Rejects Network, because he knows a whole lot about Eastern mysticism and he's an anime fan. And I'm going to talk about Gurren Lagann with him, the anime, because the core principle going on between that is the war between the spiral races and the anti-spiral races, and the friction. One is complete nihilist oblivion, and the other one is the basically the divine aspirations of the human spirit, right? And so it's the absolute championship of humanity in its essence versus the forces of anti-life. And it's one of my favorite stories in allegory about, like, to me, it represents like the real holy war that all of these conversations that between me and all my friends are having is about. So I'm very excited to talk about this show with Jin. And there was a point about the eights that I wanted to make really badly. I was thinking about the tarot cards. For one thing, what you said with the workaholic, I immediately thought of the Eight of Pentacles. But also in the major arcana, there are 3 distinct cards that have the 8. You have the Magician card. He's got the 8 halo, and the Strength card has an 8 halo, and that's a masculine figure and a feminine figure. And they're, oh, look at that, the 1 and the 8. Ain't that something? But who else? The World card, the portal that the figure in the center is coming through, has the 8 as the wrap around the portal itself. It wraps around the portal that she is coming through itself. And so all of those are right in line with all the themes we were just discussing with the 8.
Even that idea of the 3 column system. So of course, if the lunar columns are dualistic, pardon, and the Saturn column is that, solitary phallus, if you will, it's the same notion that you see even in the Koph, right? The Koph as well, linking with the Greek letter phi, and several other letters in Aramaic and such. It also shows that same idea. Again, the 1 and the 8, right? Or in the case of the Koph, 1 and half of the 8, or the 0. So it's you find it in the hexagram too, right? It's found throughout, cross culturally. It's a universal symbol leading to the universal way. And I also agree. Yeah, pretty much it's the battle that's going on between the principalities of the cosmos. Ultimately, they boil down to the dualistic view of time. Whether it's similar, for example, to the Elder Scrolls. I'm quite a big Elder Scrolls fan. If you look into the Elder Scrolls lore, you have the likes of the other elven, or they're called the Mare in that universe. Those races worship the Daedra, They worshipped, I guess you could say they were more like the Sadducees. They were more sterile in their view of time, and they wanted to go with the currents of time. And of course, you have the Dwemer, who were I believe it means deep elf within the Elder Scrolls lore. So though they wanted to simply transcend time itself, to almost be like the anti-spirals in a sense. And it's a similar notion you see even in Kabbalah. The final redemption itself, the tikkun, essentially it's a point of transcendence. Even Gershom Scholem, one of the most famous and most recent and contemporary thinkers on the Kabbalah, you could say philosophers on the Kabbalah, he also mentions that when the tikkun is finished, or almost right at the end of it, the point of Satrinitas, the point just before the immediate initiation of the Rubeda, the red dawn, the beginning once more, the renewal, the rejuvenation, that they will be able to, the Kabbalists, they will be able to transcend the bounds of the Torah, the instructions, the law. They will basically be a law unto themselves. And you see the same thing wrapped up in the notion of the Internet of all things and the mass inventorization through the biodigital convergence of souls into, well, in essence, into a perfected and you could say artificial soul trap. It leads you to this notion that was put forth by Pindar, but I mean it's found throughout. For example, Ecclesiastes, it's mentioned in another reformulated manner. This notion of the shadow of shadows, that everything within the world itself seems to be cast, or the cosmos itself seems to be cast from, seems to be a shadow cast from a singular source, a singular light source. And everything is mere, I guess you could say, mere shadows, mere, what would the word be? Mere source of patterns, dilutions, if you will, dilutions from that shadow that was initially cast from that light. So it's, yeah, I think what we're seeing with AI is something to do with that too. It's it's pretty deep. It goes to the nature of time itself and the questions of it and how, what is humanity's place in it, fundamentally.
I think that's really, really interesting. What you're talking about, the Elder Scrolls. There's a lot of interesting lore that comes out. That was a development, I think, of D&D lore. Am I right or wrong?
It was, yeah. It was a really crazy writer called I forget his first name, but his second name was McBride. But
yeah,
he was,
I think he probably dug it out of the old. I mean, I remember playing advanced D&D in the early 90s. Like that lore was out there. It's been around for a long time, and a lot of the lore is very similar, very similar, very interesting, and like where this lore came from. These games. It was originally a board game. It was a lot of fun when you sat around in a group of people with a bag of weed about that big, a bunch of cold brewskis in the fridge. Teenagers, we shouldn't be doing this, but we're going to do it. Let's go.
I had a deep preference for Werewolf the Apocalypse.
Yeah, man. Yeah. But yeah, like that's a lot of interesting the mir. When you're talking about mir, and I'm looking at the word mir. So obviously the first one is water, right? Water, the resonance, the vibration, sound, acoustics. And E, which represents the finger, right? Which is able to guide, and it's also like a sperm. It's the initiatory beginning, the finger that starts the process. You got to point to something before you start. You want to grab something, it's the finger's got to point at it in order to pick something up. To start some kind of a process, be it generative process or whatever process. So that's the numerological association there is 10. in the same way that the moving water, because it's the beginning of the word, would be 40, and then the mir or the mir, but mir would have been originally probably where it comes from, because the feminine and masculine versions of the R, and that's 200. So we got 250. And I find that quite interesting. You know, numerologically, 250 is a very interesting number because it's 25, really, with a 0 on it, which is 5 factors of 5. Sorry. 25 times 7. So it's 557, right? To get to 250. Or it's 550s. So you got a very interesting pattern of numbers that fit into that 250 number, very much charged, full of mercurial potential, and a certain element of the sevens vibrations hidden in there too.
Well, there's
obviously
there's the
breaks down
Mercury,
to 7.
the Mercury
Sorry?
and the mare. It's the same idea. You see it throughout all of the financial system as well. But even the Amorites, right? That was a theophoric name. It was named after their deity Amaru. This Amaru character is, well, of course, he has characteristics that are Jupiterian, but he has also characteristics that are arguably Saturnian. But he became that sort of what we would know now as the quintessential Lord figure. Goes by a multiplicity of, I mean, a link between Akhenaten in the 18th dynasty and the Hyksos, and I guess the Israelite religion as it became in its monotheistic state. They call Yahweh Adon, or Adonai, the majestic plural, and of course this links back to Aten. So again, they're all transliterations from ancient Egypt, but that Amorite title itself, I mean, you can find it in America, Amorica, which of course is the Latin name for Brittany. That was where the Jacobin Society orchestrated the French Revolution. America itself, I mean, the founding of America was interesting, to say the least, from I guess you could say, a conspiratorial point of view. And the secret societies and the convergence there. Same with the French Revolution. You even have the Eye of the Sahara, which is the potential site of Atlantis, or it's claimed to be. That's in a place called Mauritania. So and again, this links to the Latin mare, or sea. So you've got all of these connections, and itself, I mean, the mare is the female horse too. So back to the name, which is almost onomatopoeic. It's the the sounds of the horse itself, and the splendor solis, all the way through the alembics, the curcurbit plates. You see right at the top that the horse, the chariot is, and the charioteer, they are reining in the horses, and the horses themselves are pulling the chariot across the sky. It's the same notion that the cycles are produced by us. They're produced by our consciousness, what we give to the system. And we are the horses in that sense. We take on the name that we're given upon birth. We're brought into this role almost involuntarily to act as sources for the gods, I guess. I mean, even the term menstrual itself, the Latin prefix mens means banquet, or I think it can also mean a sort of feast. So again, you get into the idea of the Anunnaki and all of this, and the food for the gods, and even the idea that Robert Monroe brought out of Lush. Again, it's all linked to this notion of control, not necessarily controlling man directly, but steering him. That's what cybernetics was about, from the Greek kybernetikos, the steersman. So again, it's all involved with war, which itself is linked to the moon too. So the moon is the regulator of the earth. Arguably, from a symbolic point of view, the earth is the moon is not a satellite of the Earth. The Earth is a satellite of the moon. The moon is a satellite of Saturn. Again, from a symbolic point of view. So the moon regulates the mundane, hence why it's 30 days within the cycle, and then you have the 30-year orbital cycle of Saturn. That is the father of time, the regulator of the grander ages, the grander world ages. So, yeah. I'm going to have to dip out, but it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and it's been good speaking with you, Zeralath. A lot of things I didn't know. That was very fascinating things you were bringing up.
Thank you. I'm full of
big love, dear brother.
Yeah.
Travel safe, travel well, keep the smile alive. I hope you have a good weekend. Hope you're not working too hard this weekend.
No, it's actually a chill weekend. Luckily.
Bam Shiva, Shankar Bhagwan. Take it easy. And
Take it
honor
easy,
having
man.
you on the show.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.
Big love.
Later.
Yeah, it's interesting, hey, when he brings up about the Zeus crowd, right? And how that relates to this card. Yeah. I mean, you're also knee deep into the tarot, right? Or elbow deep or neck deep, whatever.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So here we've got the card of Jupiter, effectively. Good luck and all of that. But this, I think, is also the wheel of life and death. And of course, it's hard to say that those aren't ruins, right?
Those aren't ruins. What the
runes? Runes. Runes.
It's
across those lines, they look like they could have been runes at some point to me.
Those. Okay, yeah, those symbols are. I still have to do a little bit more of a recall of memory on the detail dive of all of these little symbols, because I think we're looking at that might be Mercury in the northern position.
Yeah,
that might be.
I'm talking about the actual arms.
Arms.
Yeah, there's it's two crosses. Yeah.
No,
I don't mean the Hebrew or the alchemical symbols. I mean just the crosses. I think in older versions of this card, the lines had little nicks on them. Does that make sense?
Sure.
They weren't arrows, but they had nicks. Like you get a spinning cross.
Okay.
What we call the swastika. I think those lines had little nicks on them.
Oh.
But they weren't at 90 degrees. They were at 45 degrees, and it makes me think of the runes. What is that rune called? Is it called Fuk?
Okay, well then you got you would have a filfat or a swastika, which would have been based on the
Fir.
On the Uwaj rune, Uwaj rune, which is the fire wheel, and you're taking two Uwaj runes and you are crossing them like Gebo, and then that's where you get that from.
And that fire wheel is related to Odin, no?
Yeah. Yes, as the
just like this is related to Zeus.
Yeah. Well, it's
the lightning wielder.
It's related to Odin, because in some myths, such as where Odin hangs, it's correspondent to when I think it's Ursa Major is in the south, or when it's pointing down, right? So that's like Odin hanging is during that season, I believe, right? Because the bear, like a lot of people don't understand, like the bear, and like Odin and Thor both operate with the Berserkers. Both of them do. So Odin is associated with the bear, even though it's not an animal that is with him in the hunt. But that's kind of just part of It's part of the thing that's in there because of the relationship to Fenris, because a dire wolf is a bear is kind of like a dire wolf, because it's a big, like, canine adjacent animal. They are canine adjacent in the animal kingdom if you look at how they map that out, and it rationally makes sense. And so he would be, because death and rebirth, because he would be coming back to life in that respect. And basically any one of these any deity that has power over life and death, which includes Thor, Balder, and a few others, then that rune is going to mean a lot to them.
Yeah, so like I've always seen this, and I've always thought it reminds me of that fire rune configuration when I've, like, ever since I was a kid, and I used to look at this card. Like, I might not work specifically with the runes, but I actually, funny little story. I waited till I was 18 to use lysergic acid, right?
Okay.
And I waited for like, I don't know how many years, 5 years. I discovered it when I was 12 or 13 in my research. I was like, oh, that's definitely something I might want to get onto. And then I was like, yeah, well, it's going to change your brain chemistry. So I was diligent and I was training hard with my, occult therapeutics, my work, my meditation, my ritual, my study. And so I waited. I decided I was going to wait till I turned 18. And obviously my 18th birthday came, and I was like, there was a friend of mine, Andrew, and he was also very much deeply embedded into the occult. And I was like, dude, I want to like just go on a journey. And we did. And the first journey I went on, I remember getting into the shower, and there was this being. She was with me in the water, and she was like, we were like in this embrace in the water in the shower, and I was like, oh my gosh, she was like talking to me without words. And I had this very intense experience with this Mur people, whoever she was like she wasn't physical. And I got out of the shower after having this powerful goddess connection with the water. And I sat down and I found a corner to sit in wherever, and I started writing and didn't think anything of it. And my friend found me. Now, he used to work with the runes because he was also Norse tradition. He was from that neck of the woods. And he was like he looked and he picked them up, and there was like, I must have written about 7 or 8 pages of like just runes. Like you write a whole foolscap page.
Yeah.
And I explained how the grammar worked to him and what the words meant and how they worked. And I was telling him how there was a life where I was a record keeper and I used to write the sagas. And I was explaining the saga that I was writing was one of the sagas I was just writing. So I slipped into trance, and these runes came through me. And, I never thought anything of it afterwards. I thought, interesting experience. Like, trance mediumship was never something that was, how can I put it? I'd been experiencing this since I was a kid. So it was just like normal. It was just another thing. And I never thought about it. But some part of me has got that Germanic runes in my blood. Yeah. Like must be the Prussian side in my bloodline, because there's a part of my bloodline that's Dutch and Prussian. Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know, that must have some kind of a Norse connection. But anyway, so when I've looked at this ever since I was a kid, I've seen that in this picture, which people don't really talk about.
I was gonna say, I think the Prussians have Germanic people in them at that time. If not, they're going to be kind of more on the Slavic side of things, and you're either going to have that connection via the root race as being part of the Arctic family group, or it's going to be the Germanic connection.
Pretty much a Germanic, I'm pretty sure, because the kind of runes that I was writing, he knew a lot about runes, and he tracked that rune back, and he said that's a very old form of runic that you're writing, and he was like, it's comes from the Norse. It was one of the old forms of the runes, and he didn't know how to, like, the grammar and everything. He was like blown away because apparently I was describing this language with the grammar and how it works and
You want to
stuff
show it?
that a lot of
See if I can read it.
I don't have it.
Oh,
I left it with him.
oh,
I
ask for
wasn't. I wasn't. I was just like, it's just another thing. Like, I was more interested. Like, who was she in the shower with me? Right?
Oh well, naturally. I
I was like, who was she in the shower with me? Oh my gosh, who was she? Where? What was she? What was that? So I was like very gripped in by that experience. But anyway, that was just my initiatory experience of Lysergic, and but yeah. So to me, when I look at this, I see that runic presence in that wheel, and to me, that wheel's spinning, and that is the wheel of life, like you say, the wheel of life and death, but it's the wheel of chance. And I see this world as like being a wheel of chance. It's like a casino table life, isn't it? You roll dice, you bet on your choices in life, right?
Yep.
And there's the Sphinx. So we've got the Sphinx. Basically, we've taken the Sphinx apart. And in the heart of the Sphinx, there's this fire wheel spinning. And when you put the Sphinx back together, again, this is the heart of the Sphinx. Yeah? That's how I always look at this. I look at this as like they've taken the Sphinx apart. When you put the Sphinx back together, in the heart, you got the fire wheel. And that's like life and death. And that's also the cherubim in, angelic roots of the idea of the cherubs. So, but here we've got a really beautiful depiction of it. And, the clouds around the blue sky to me speak about electrical potential. Yeah. Lightning, because cloud and blue sky separation means you've got polarized bodies of water. And if you've got clouds in different places like that, you're going to have repolarizing positive and negative ions, positive, negative ions, positive, negative ions, right? It's like a vortex through which, like, if you think of how lightning works, yeah, lightning needs to have these different positive, negative avenues to create high potentials. And then it's like there's a sonic boom, yeah, with thunder, because the electrical impulses causes some kind of an attempted vacuum, right? But nature abhors a vacuum. So there's this big boom, this sonic boom, and that's cracking of that lightning, like when it makes that noise, which has got to do with these polarizing effects. And so if you've got these four clouds around, to me, I'm looking at a diagram of how lightning works.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
And, yes, and thus it's also a diagram of how the mind works, because the Norse, when you go into the lore of Ymir, the first entity, right? The proto god that made up the material realm. When he was destroyed by Odin Villian which represents the mind, the will, and the sacred power. When they took his brains, they threw his brains into the sky, and those were all the angry clouds. Storm clouds, in particular, are the brains of Ymir, right? So that's where you've got that electrical activity. This is also why Odin is a storm god, because he is the master of this. And the storm is used in mythological allegory for a battle. Okay? But at the same time, it is the knowing that the brain has electrical signals. Knowing that the brain worked like that is in that mythology, and that's what makes that extraordinary.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like when I look at the word storm, I see that hissing sound of fire, potential, energy, heat. And then I see that cross of Saturn, right? The st. And then or is the spectrum of light, or becoming the where sound is producing light, and is how that light moves through a prism, becoming an aura light. Or means light, and then the is that final resonance of water. So how this light is generated through a prism effect, and resonates into the water, becoming, well, the moment something touches water, it becomes highly energized, right?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, a storm. One way to look at a storm. What is a storm? It is a tor with a S and an M marking it, right? So you've got the tor, which it's not like a torus, it's just a tor, right? So like torque, torsion, Thor, right? Like, so it's power. Its power is what the tor is. And so
And
the S and the M influence that meaning. The M is the mind and it's mankind, which is why it can be for battles and masses of people as much as it can be just for a thought. And then the S is the soul.
the serpent, the
Serpent.
changeable.
It's the serpent and it's the soul. And there's a serpent. There's a serpent on the Wheel of Fortune. It's on the left-hand side next to the O.
Yeah.
And it's very common in a lot of Jungian Mandela that there's always a serpent around the core structure of the design, right? This reflects the Orphic egg in this respect.
An interesting Tor. Tor is how you cast a spell. And so you've got a ek gaan jou Tor, right? I'm going to cast a spell at you. Tor Vanar means a magician. That's coming from Dutch Germanic roots. So Tor means the word Tor means magic. And then we've got from that coming Tour. And Tour means to journey, to travel. So originally, the magic was obtained by traveling out of your body, right? Going on a journey, coming back into your body, and bringing something back with you into your body, right?
Right.
That can affect
that's
whatever's going on here.
That's that etymological nuance between Tyr and Thor. And both of them are gods associated with travel. Both of them have Jupiterian qualities in that respect. However, Tyr is a god of war and Thor is not, which is, but even though most stories are about him going off and picking fights with the enemy because he's all about the preemptive strike, right? But Tyr actually doesn't have that many fights. He doesn't have that many stories like that because even though he's a war god, he's actually he's actually traveling and he is much more. He's not actually warlike typically when he's out there. So it's much more in his travels because he's trying to make peace, right? Because Tyr is, we use war now because of the context of our small understanding of what a war is in a mythology of gods. It's a clash of wills, right? Mars is not the god of war. It's will. It's the will. It's all will, and often enough conflict can escalate to war, but it initiates just with will. There would never be a war if nobody ever got in Ares's way. But the problem is that sometimes Ares wants to do shit that nobody agrees with, and thus war. So it's the will, right? That's what's going on here. Conflict of wills.
Yeah, yeah. And somebody mentions as well that the obvious that the corners are like gates leading somewhere, 4 directions. And so the number 4 is obviously being referenced here as well. So
Yeah.
it's number 10, it's number 4. And you've got the number 8 referenced here too, because it's 2 4s. It's dynamic. 4 is fixed. 4 is solid, right? 4 is stationary in a sense.
Yes.
8 is like dynamism of 4.
Yeah.
Like when you put 4 into action, it's 8. 8 is got all the best parts of 4 moving. Yeah. 4 gets stagnant.
This
4
is
is powerful. It's a powerful number, but it gets stagnant. It gets stuck.
this is a similar design to many Nordic magical compasses. The Vigvasir is one of the most popular, as well as the one I showed you earlier, which I'm wearing today, which is this Aegishjon, the Helm of Awe.
Go on, let's get a look at it. I
Yeah,
got a look at it earlier.
Yep. Oh wait.
It's beautiful.
There we go.
See, there we see the Nordic version of the Wheel of Life. That's like another version of the same tarot card, isn't it?
Right. You know, the 8 directions are the 8 realms that converge to make our reality as we know it. And also a good distinction. Howard in the chat had mentioned how Tyr was the OG Sky Father. Yeah, in the Paradise time, there wasn't that much winter and darkness, and so it wasn't that he was the OG. It's that Odin kind of became a thing when when the dark times came and you had Udin. And when those dark times came, everything was getting separated. So so the mythology of Udinma was cut off for a while, and the language was picking up on fragments of what it remembered, which is why the Norse Germanic stories are so close to the Bach saga, Wainamoinen mythology. So Tyr is the summer god, aka he's a god when the sun is at its strongest, and Odin is the psychopomp. So he's the one that gets us through the valley of the shadow of death and all that stuff. He walks us through hell when hell has got a foothold in this world for a period of time during the deathly ice and snow. That's how that actually works.
Yeah, we can see that. Yeah.
So this is Tyr.
We can see these 2 personalities. Yeah. Right. And they depicted in like Western different notions, but the one is like traveling through the underworld. The one is, traveling through the upper world. And it's our notion of underworld is evil and upper world is good. But actually, like, we know that this is all a little bit twisted because we're supposed to fear death. This is what the demonization of the underworld, I think, is what's characterized death in the way that it's been characterized. Something that we should fear, not talk about, shy away from. Yeah. Like in our culture, in our Western culture, it's very interesting. Like when somebody passes away, you can't go near the body. The body's going to be handled by other people. But in the old days, we would handle our own loved ones, right? We would like physically clean them ourselves. We would dig the hole ourselves with our own sweat. We had a sense of closure, right? Because of touching the body, where now we're not encouraged to interact with the body. What are your thoughts on that? This characterization of death is this
It's
dark thing we must stay away from.
it's the same attitude when we come into this world. You're ripped from mother and father immediately. I mean, the father barely has the right to be there the way the way this system acts. You know, you're on delicate glass when you're in that situation. And then at death, it's kind of the same. It's the same manner of a thing. And I know that I certainly am not built for it. You know, it was horrifying. You know, seeing various moments. You know, I was kind of present here at the moment that my grandfather died, you know, in this home, you know. So yeah, it's become a heavy deal as we've been so put away from it and are enjoying these privileged lives and shaming people through making it very hard to do simple kinds of things like have a birth that's none of your effing business and have a death that's none of your effing business.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, during my training, I got to a point where I wanted to spend time with people that were passing away. Yeah. So I actually went to go and become trained as a palatal carer. So I used to care for people, palatal care, to be the person with them when they were passing away. You know, people that were like really ill and basically very old and very you know, terminal diseases that they couldn't be cured from. And there's something quite powerful about when somebody's leaving their body. Yeah. Like it's probably the most spiritualizing moments we will have in our lives because it's like being present at a birth. I remember, like you say, with my little boy, I insisted on cutting his umbilical cord. And they didn't want me to hold my little baby. And I was like, no, he's my baby. Like, I've washed my hands. I'm wearing gloves. Come on. Do you know what I mean? Because to go into the operating theater, you got to get dressed up like a doctor. Yeah. You got to go through this stringent hand washing and alcohol all over your hands and put on special things over your shoes. And like they give you one of these suits. It's like a hazmat suit, man. It's one set.
No,
it's
too, but it's
one
just,
second away from a hazmat suit.
Just sanitize yourself, you know, for the sake of that. And I go in and touch your kid. I don't think we were wearing any kind of barrier for skin I mean, like, we're acting like everybody just every kid effing died all like that effing much. I don't think that really was the case.
Yeah.
I think that we were living. You see, look, if you need to make rules for people that want to live a certain way, then it's probably for the best, because if you're not a very conscientious person, you know, there's just, you're unfortunately not acting like your own man. So therefore people are going to treat you like you're not your own man. Right. But if you act like your own effing man and you've demonstrated baseline responsibility, you got to allow that, you know, that shit to happen. You got to allow that shit to happen. Besides, we all know you're hypocrites anyway, because you asked us to trust all sorts of certain sciences. It's been a good 3 hours, man. Would it be all right if we take a wrap on this? I'd like to get some stuff done at 6.
Yeah, I was just saying that definitely it's definitely time to go because it's getting late here as well, man. And one last thing, just to respond to Howard's last question about Hades. You know, I think that's quite an interesting. Obviously, the death tarot card gives us like a little bit of an insight into that. But the whole idea of Hades is a very interesting concept of mapping the underworld. Yeah, and like what are your thoughts?
Well, the Hades mythos in particular, I still need to get more familiar with. I'm not deeply familiar with Greek mythos, but I have a strong command of a lot of the stuff that goes around in the conversation. I've been so focused on other avenues throughout this aspect of things, right? The death card. I mean, I did a whole thing on the death card. I got to share it sometime. It's somewhere. It might be on my Odyssey channel. I might want to get that put up on YouTube again. I was pretty good. Yeah, like the death card is going to be more the psychopomp. It's not necessarily the Lord of the Dead themselves picking you up, right? It's someone who is about going between life and death, right? Mercury, Odin, Anubis, um, all manner of those kinds. They're more likely to be the death card, as opposed to the actual ruler of the underworld. I find the death card very interesting because it's kind of like the night card for the major arcana. If the major arcana reflects the minor arcana in that respect, then it counts as a court card in that respect. It's designed in a similar fashion where the horse is coming into frame left to right, and the wearer has something in his hands that represents the source of his power. And so
He's flagging it.
yes. So death and the dead are kind of two different things. Death, these are the god of the transition process itself, who is also involved with various things of the living and of the dead. But the one who actually is lording over the dead, the male deity of that, and then the female deity of that, right? The female deity is kind of more important because it's kind of about your experience in the underworld, right? Hell in Helheim in the Norse mythos, she is she is like a nurse, right? Um and it's kind of it sounds like it's her show alone down there, with a theoretical relationship to her father Loki, whose misfortunes brings people to her, right? Because some could say that in a general sense, if you died and you didn't go to Valhalla, it is probably because Loki pulled out a trick on you, which would include you got sick because you don't understand where it came from. It makes no sense. It's a cruel misfortune. This is the cruel side of Loki as opposed to the kind side of Loki, right? And kind of reinforces this idea that before the corruption, the trickster spirit, as this kind of power, was there as kind of a karma police, akin to how some quote demons are as servants in a system, because just like we need prisons for the sinners that have not yet died, we have prisons for those that need to serve some degree of a sentence of their own making, because when you die, it's really ultra therapy, because the karma is not really there anymore, because you're going on to the next life, unless you're a psychopath. That that level, if you've done horrible things, you get stripped and reprocessed, and you lose everything the soul attained. And that's the second death. This is in Egyptian mythology. This is Ammit. You get swallowed by the crocodile. Well, you get eaten. That means logically you are absorbed by Ammit, and then you are shit out. and you have to start all over as a protoplasm of consciousness and work your way up the spiritual psychic food chain. If you get up to dogs and primates, you'll get eventually back into a human. It's brutal. It's brutal. Don't be a psychopath, kids. Don't be a psychopath. You don't want the second death.
Yeah, yeah, man. I think also like when we look at Hades and we look at Osiris, so Hades had, what did he have? He had a helmet, eh? That gives him invisibility. And I think that relates to like being covered in mystery. Yeah. Like that you can't be seen in the physical realm. You can travel unseen. Which means like you can be anywhere without people knowing you're there, I suppose. And Osiris didn't specifically have this, but I think Osiris did have a shroud of mystery around him that you couldn't necessarily see his form easily. Both rulers of the underworld, right? Both rulers of maintaining the order. So when we think of Hades, we think of like order in the afterlife. The underworld isn't chaotic to the point where there's no order in it. It's just a different type of order which comes from chaos, right? Chaos. So it's the order of chaos, I think. Like if we were to look at it from an English perspective, with chaos not meaning what we think it means. It's a different form of order. It's the feminine order. It's the divine feminine's order. And interestingly enough, the masculine force relates to, I think, passing away, and the feminine bringing life in, right? So the masculine passes away into the feminine, and the feminine brings life into the masculine. Sort of like this wheel turning idea of the womb in the woman, and the men have like the bodies to be able to go and do war, you know? Like it goes back to the Norse traditions of that. Like men were obviously pretty good soldiers because of their physical form.
Right.
Not that women weren't soldiers too, because like some women can like really be pretty lethal. But yeah, so I think we've reached that 3-hour point.
Yes.
Shall we call it a day?
Yeah, let's call it a day, my man. This has been fun and fantastic.
Totally. Loved the conversation. Thank you. It's been an honor. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Silas. It's been an honor. Thank you, everybody in the chat. I hope you guys enjoyed and got what you came for. It's been an honor hosting and being a part of this conversation. Sending you all big love, big blessings, peace, honor, and respect. Celebrate the dying, celebrate death. Prepare yourself for when you will die by living your life to the fullest, because you've got nothing to lose. Big love. Blessed be.